17-year-old Austin Metcalf was at a high school track meet. Austin didn't make it home because he was stabbed in the chest by 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony, a student from another high school.
We don't know what was said. We don't know what was threatened. But what Karmelo said was that he was going to put his hands on me.
He should be afforded the same rights that Kyle Rittenhouse had.
The confrontation began when Karmelo got under the tent with Austin and his teammates, and Austin told Karmelo to leave. What happened next will be disputed at trial. Did Austin grab Karmelo, creating a situation where he was facing a threat of great bodily harm? Or did Karmelo simply overreact and stab Austin in the chest?
Whatever you think what happened between Karmelo and the Metcalf boys, my 3 younger children, my husband, and I didn't do anything to deserve to be threatened, harassed, and lied about.
The atmosphere at the courthouse is tense, and this is a case which has absolutely divided the community. Was Karmelo Anthony justified in putting a knife in Austin Metcalf's chest? Austin Metcalf, the victim, is white. Karmelo Anthony, the defendant, is black. And trust me, it is a factor. It's a factor in the community and could be a factor inside the courtroom. But this is a case of self-defense. Karmelo Anthony is going to have to get up on that witness stand and tell the jury exactly why he did what he did. Can he convince the jury that Austin Metcalf deserved to have a knife plunged in his chest because he was threatening Karmelo with great bodily harm? I'm Vinny Politan. Let's investigate. Austin Metcalf was just 17 years old. Every time I do a story involving young people like this, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking because so much is lost, so much promise, so much life is gone. And then you've got a family that has to bury a child. And that just shouldn't happen. And when that does happen, we've got to take a close look at how it happened. Now, in this case, the defendant, Karmelo Anthony, is also just 17 years old. So regardless of how you look at this case, the rest of his life now will be in the hands of a jury and trying to figure out, okay, was he actually threatened? Was he the victim in this case? Was the murder justified? So there's a lot at stake from his perspective as well when you look at what happened here. But he's alive and Austin Metcalf isn't. This whole thing, when you dive into the facts, makes no sense. It seems like it's a fight, a confrontation, a fatal confrontation about absolutely nothing, which unfortunately many times it is when we're talking about teenagers and teenage boys acting out. Like there was nothing happening here. Did they even know each other before this? Like, why would you escalate from, kind of like, you get out of here to now someone is dead? To me, that makes no sense. The other thing that has happened in this case, and it's divided the community. People see it very differently, but are very passionate on both sides. And a lot of that has to do with the color of the skin of the 2 people involved in this. The 17-year-old victim, the 17-year-old defendant, one is white, one is black. And that divide is making its way into this case, into this story, and ultimately into what's happening at the courthouse. Cody Thomas, who's in McKinney, Texas, where all this is happening. I've been talking, Cody, about the divisive nature of this case and how it sort of polarized the community. Paint the picture for us at the courthouse as this trial is beginning.
Yeah, Vinny, I got out here earlier this morning, and honestly, Vinny, it was a little slower than I expected it to be, given just the polarizing nature that this case has garnered across this country. Of course, it's grabbed many headlines, but also because of the optics. You have a young black kid who stabbed a young white kid, so naturally, viewers of this story are gonna, have their different opinions about that. But as you look behind me here in front of this courthouse, you don't see much action happening. But Vinny, if we swing it over here, as I'm walking towards this way, this is away from the courthouse. So you look back here, this is probably 100 yards away, probably a football field away. You can see that some of these demonstrators have come out here now. They just arrived in the last 20 minutes as I've been standing here. They were not out here initially this morning, and you see about, I don't know, 15, 20 of them out here. They strike me. They look like Karmelo Anthony supporters. I saw some Black Lives Matter signage out there. I haven't seen anybody for Austin Metcalf's side of the situation here over. I don't know if they'd be over here in this parking lot. I've heard earlier that there was a situation out here earlier this week where they had Karmelo Anthony supporters. They had supporters of Austin Metcalf's family over in that section of the parking lot, but no one's over there as of right now. But again, Benny, a little slower than I expected. Again, 15, 20 people out here. They're playing instruments. They're chanting some things out there. We see some more news media outlets out there, but still a very slow day here at this courthouse so far on this day of jury selection.
Now, Cody, I mean, the barricades, I mean, they've pushed everyone way back from the courthouse. Are they really that concerned about what could happen here?
Yeah, I mean, like, again, polarizing story. Of course, there's just high emotion. It's highly charged, especially here in this community, given the nature of the case. You see these barricades right here behind me. No cars can drive on this area of the roadway here going up to the courthouse. So they have barricades here. They got the barricades again as we swing back towards where I see these demonstrators at, and they have, you know, those big, tall, that tall tower of cameras there monitoring the parking lot. You see the barriers back there keeping cars out, but the security is definitely high. They have barricades here. They have barricades inside, actually, too. I went into the courtroom for about 30 minutes before popping back out here, and you have the two seating areas. Seating area over here, seating area on the right side, and then you have the aisle where people walk in, and there was even barricades on each side of the seating to make sure, I guess, people don't reach across or mess with anybody as they walk in, whether it's a witness or whatever. And inside the courtroom, Benny, it's actually really small. There's only about 65 seats, and I was talking to the media liaison inside there. He said 45 seats are already taken between media, 15 people each for each side, each party's family, so that's 30, and then plus court staff. 45 seats are already gone before the general public's already allowed in there. So this is going to be a very compact situation going on here. And of course, we know the judge is laying down the law. No recording inside, no live streaming, no electronics. The only people that are only allowed to have electronics in there for note-taking purposes are for people like me, the media, and they are very much so strictly monitoring that as well, making sure we're not making any phone calls, sending any text messages, strictly note-taking. You can't wear any shirts or anything that have any sort of messaging or sentiment toward either party. Very strict, tight ship here for this case going on here in Texas.
Yeah, I feel like they believe this is like a powder keg that could explode one way or the other. And as we know in trials, Cody, there's always a verdict. So my guess is, however long the case takes, when they get towards the time when a verdict is announced, they may up the security even more.
I would imagine so. I mean, we've seen it in big trials here, especially in the Karen Reed case. You and I were up there. We saw the hecticness that went on with that and how they had those barriers way off from the courthouse. So I imagine as this trial gets underway, we expect opening statements to start tomorrow. They're still in jury selection today. They've been doing that since Monday. I talked to the media people inside. They said there was about a pool of 600 jurors. I think 589 was the exact number, and they've dwindled that down now to 250. And so they'll pick from that pool to try to get an impartial jury, which, Vinny, I imagine would be a tall task given just the sheer nature of this case. I mean, everyone knows about this case. I imagine, especially here in this community, they know about this case and they have their opinions on it. So we're in the middle of jury selection now, but to your point, Vinny, once this trial gets underway, however long it's supposed to last, a few weeks, once it gets down to those final days when that verdict is supposed to come out, I imagine this is going to be, you know, north and south, like the North Pole and the South Pole when it comes to the emotional gravity of what's going on here on both sides.
Absolutely. Painting a very clear picture for us, Cody Thomas in Texas. And Cody Thomas is still with us at the courthouse. Cody, I want to talk about what happened now, get into some of the facts and alleged facts in the case. What was going on? Why did these two young people, 17 years old, why did they have this conflict? What were the circumstances surrounding all this?
Yeah, Vinny, you mentioned the age there. I mean, it's just sad all around. Two 17-year-old men that had their whole lives ahead of them, and they were both on track to graduate. But Vinny, the situation, April 2025, they're at a championship track meet at a high school in Frisco, Texas. And if you've ever been to a track meet, they have multiple schools on the same side of the bleachers. You might have 10 to 12 schools that are sitting out there, and they have the tent set up, signifying each school. And so not only do they have tents set up to stay out of the sun, this particular day, there was a little rain delay. Some rain started and everything. Now, Karmelo and Austin went to different schools. They didn't know each other. There was no history there. we don't know, this is one of the facts we've heard, Karmelo Anthony was under Austin Metcalf's school's tent. Unbeknownst to anyone why he was there. We don't know if he had a friend there. We don't know if he was just, poking around as a rival school. We don't know if he was talking to a girl, anything like that. We don't know why he was there. But Austin Metcalf, you know how charged up young men can get, rival schools. He was like, get out from under our tent. We don't know exactly the verbiage or the phrasing that went down or how aggressive or not aggressive it may have been. But essentially, Austin told Karmelo to get out from under the tent. Now a verbal altercation starts. And according to some eyewitnesses there, some of the students there that gave reports to the police, they say they saw Karmelo at some point reach down into his bag and hold his hand there and say something to the effect of, touch me and see what happens. Now, 17-year-old kid's not expecting somebody to pull out a knife, so Austin Metcalf kind of approaches him and goes to shove him. Karmelo had his hand on his knife, comes back out, stabs Austin once in the chest, and then Austin dies, bleeds out in his twin brother's arms there in the bleachers. And Karmelo runs off, and police say when they approached him, Karmelo actually admitted to doing this. He admitted to stabbing him, but he says, of course, it was self-defense, that Austin was, coming at him. But Benny, one of the biggest things that stood out to me here, one of the biggest questions in this whole case, like while all this may have happened, those are just the facts of the case. Why did Karmelo have a knife on him, and let alone why did he have it on school grounds, which is illegal within itself? So I'm sure that's going to be a really damaging fact once this trial actually gets underway and testimony starts. I don't know how his defense is going to be able to explain that. Why'd you already have it if you're going to talk about a self-defense claim? You already had a knife and you're ready to use it. So we're going to see how that plays out once it gets into the courtroom.
Right, and we've seen other cases. We've covered it just recently here on Court TV out of Connecticut, the case involving the young man there who, again, had a knife. His defense, his self-defense, was that he was surrounded by a group of people who were beating him up. In this case, do we know whether or not it was just Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony, or if it was Austin Metcalf plus his teammates versus Karmelo Anthony? Is that the allegation by the defense?
The allegation that we've heard so far, Vinny, based on what we read in reports and other, reporting from different media outlets, is that it was just specifically between these two men. Of course, you had two teams there. You'd imagine a bunch of boys want to jump in if things go down. But as far as we know right now, based on the facts that have been released to us, of course, we know there's an airtight gag order on this case, so there's not much that we've learned in the past year since this went down. But as far as we know, it's just between these two parties and no one else.
That's interesting. Right? And the backstory of why he was there isn't known. Why he had a knife is not known. And exactly the level of physical confrontation before the stabbing. My guess is that will be a disputed fact, whether or not Austin, how aggressive he was when there was some sort of physical contact between him and Karmelo. And that's going to be crucial for all this.
Absolutely. And another thing I feel is going to be crucial, Vinny, no matter how people look at it, what was said, how aggressive was the verbal attack, if it was even an attack on behalf of Austin toward Karmelo, to maybe even put him in a mindset to where a fight would even start. What was actually said, let alone the physical thing. People can still be provoked based on words. We've seen it plenty of times here at Court TV with some of the cases we cover. I think that's going to be crucial as well as they bring that in. Another thing, Benny, there's evidently, you have a bunch of high schoolers, phones come out immediately, and there's surveillance. There's phone video. Of course, we haven't seen it. No one's seen it. But if that video comes out and it shows Karmelo as the aggressor, or it shows, maybe just a light shove on behalf of Austin, and then Karmelo comes back and stabs him with a knife, I don't know how they're going to be able to fight that, because the video is going to tell all.
Right. When it comes to using deadly force in self-defense, it's right. About the threat, the level of the threat. What's the reasonableness of his perception of what's happening in that moment? And ultimately, that's what this case will be about. And, as we've seen, Cody, in most of the self-defense cases, the defendant testifies to tell his or her story about that. Have we heard anything? I know there's the gag order. I know defense attorneys don't like people to know, but have we heard anything about Karmelo potentially testifying in his own defense in this case?
Well, Vinny, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to mention that gag order once again, but we haven't heard anything in those regards. In fact, Vinny, we haven't even seen Karmelo Anthony, his defense team. We've seen nobody from his family, nobody from Austin Metcalf's family. We've seen none of the major players as I've been here today, and I've been here for a few hours now, maybe 3, 2 to 3 hours, and I haven't seen anybody outside of, people going to and from the courtroom. And I was in the courtroom about an hour before I came back out here and started doing this. But haven't seen any of the major players and haven't heard anything about the order of witnesses. And again, the most crucial, whether Karmelo is going to testify himself. But I'm sure if he's going to make the self-defense claim as a juror, I would want to hear why you felt you feared for your life in order to use that deadly force. So I'm sure that'll be a conversation him and his defense team has, very thoroughly before that decision eventually comes in this case.
Cody Thomas in McKinney, Texas. Thank you so much. Great to see you. The reaction to what happened to Austin Metcalf was intense. It was absolutely intense. And a big part of what happened here is that Karmelo Anthony, who admittedly was responsible for the stabbing death, but again is claiming self-defense in all of this, wasn't really locked up, was able to, get released at points very close to all this when all this was happening. So the wounds were very deep on one side, and on the other side, Karmelo Anthony's family was feeling some fear from the community reaction. And that's what escalated this story and this case into the national spotlight. And the mother of Karmelo Anthony, Kayla Hayes, spoke at a press conference to express what their family was going through as a result of their son stabbing and killing Austin Metcalf. Let's take a look at part of that.
Good afternoon. My name is Kayla Hayes. I am the mother of Karmelo Anthony. 3 years ago, my family moved to North Texas searching for a better life. Like so many other families, we wanted to give our children the future we did not have. My husband works hard every single day to provide for us, to make sure we're in the best financial position possible. As a stay-at-home mom, I made it my life's mission to ensure our children are loved, nurtured, and supported every step of the way. In wake of this tragic incident, our family has been under attack. Whatever you think what happened between Karmelo and the Metcalf boys, my 3 younger children, my husband, and I didn't do anything to deserve to be threatened, harassed, and lied about. The lies and false accusations that have been said about us, especially over the past week, has been overwhelming. The lies and their amplification put my family in danger, as well as everyone in our community, everyone involved in the investigation, from the police, the attorneys, and the court staff. Our address and my husband's previous employer's address has been put on all social media platforms. My husband had to take a leave of absence because he's afraid what may happen to our family. His mental health is deteriorating day by day. We have endured death threats. My 13-year-old daughter is afraid to sleep in her own bedroom because she's fearful of what may happen to her. And let me be clear.
So I think what this illustrates is what we've been talking about, which has been the reaction to this case, the reaction to what happened between Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony. And there's outrage on both sides, right? Absolute outrage. And here you have the mother of the defendant, the mother of the killer, whether it's justified or not, talking about what has happened to her as a result of her son killing Austin Metcalf. And again, even this reaction created another reaction to all this and then amplified everything even to a greater extent. But this is the reality of the tension that is in that community, the tension at the courthouse, and the tension inside the courtroom. Let's continue to watch.
The claims that were used about the public donation to buy a home or anything else are completely false. We have not received a single dime from the Give, Send, Go fundraiser. And the co-founder has stated that clearly. In the reality, we were just notified yesterday that we could begin to withdraw funds. And it still takes several days to receive those funds once a request is made. I don't know why we are being targeted and discriminated against before a fair trial. Our son deserves the same rights under the law that everyone is afforded to. He's been raised in a two-parent home with structure, stability, love, and we put God first in everything that we do. We believe in the Constitution, we believe in the laws of this state, but those laws must apply to all of us, not just some of us. To be clear, we will not speak publicly about specific details of what happened under the tent on that rainy and awful day. There's an active investigation that everyone involved wants to be full and fair. We believe in the legal process, and that is where the truth will come out. To the family who experienced the loss, my heart truly goes out to you. To those who have supported my family, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We ask for your continued support, patience, and prayers as we navigate this difficult process. Thank you.
17-year-olds, right? When it's your child on trial, I understand the reaction. Your family gets death threats. I understand the reaction. At the end of the day, though, for Austin Metcalf's family, it's a much different situation. Their 17-year-old is not here. Their 17-year-old is dead. And now a jury must decide whether or not the killing of Austin Metcalf was justified or not. The scene outside of the courthouse was tense.
Karmelo! Free Karmelo! Free Karmelo!
When is a white boy been before an all-black jury? Tell us, media.
A story, a case, a trial that divided the community. Karmelo Anthony claiming self-defense after he stabbed and killed Austin Metcalf. The jury rejected Karmelo's story, convicted him of murder, and sentenced him to 35 years in prison.
Y'all know y'all wrong. Come on. I swear to God, I'm sick of this.
Now the aftermath of a trial the judge did not allow the nation to see. Austin's father setting the internet on fire after live streaming his raw emotions. And a public debate about what the surveillance video the judge kept from the public actually shows. And of course, the appeal. Will Karmelo Anthony get a second chance? So many reactions, so many unresolved issues after this dramatic verdict in Texas. The aftermath of the verdict and the trial in the Karmelo Anthony, Austin Metcalf case has not calmed down at all. As a matter of fact, it may have turned up a little bit in terms of the intensity of the public debate that is happening now. And it's all because this judge made a mistake. A mistake when he banned cameras and microphones from inside the courtroom. When you have a case that the public is invested in, the public is debating, and has caused conflict within your community, the remedy is transparency. Let the public see and hear all the evidence so they may understand. They may not agree with, but they may understand how the jury reached their verdict. But this judge did not do that, and we have chaos now. There is actual dispute about what the surveillance video shows. It's a piece of evidence that is part of a public record that everyone should have seen by now. They should have seen it during the course of the trial. That should have been televised. And all of a sudden, then maybe some of the debate would go away because you have people saying that it shows one thing and the other side is saying it shows something else, and maybe it shows absolutely nothing. But the public doesn't know because the public didn't see it. All because of the judge's mistake. We're still debating the evidence here. We're still debating what witnesses actually said. because no one is getting anything firsthand. You're getting it secondhand. And many of the people delivering the messages have an agenda. So everything gets shaded and twisted. That's why Court TV puts cameras and microphones in there so the public can see and hear the evidence and make their own minds up. Something else happened in this case. The judge issued a gag order. There's a First Amendment right to speech, and the gag order is something that should be narrowly addressed. And Austin's father, his son was stabbed to death, and he hasn't been able to talk about this. Well, he finally did in a live stream that everyone is talking about. A whole roller coaster of emotion and issues that he is talking about. And some of those pieces of what he's saying, extremely controversial from both sides, and everyone is reacting to this. So let's start there. There was a podcast on Rumble from Jinxed SIP, interview with Sarah Fields. It was an interview, but it was really Austin's father speaking for 10 minutes at a clip in between questions. Here's part of what he said. And again, it's only a small part. Drew Anthony, Kayla, those are the parents of Karmelo Anthony. You're cowards. You wouldn't even show up for your son's sentencing or victim impact statement. You abandoned your kid. You left him there. I guess he's no more use to you because you can't get any more GoFundMe money or GoSendGo money. You are grifters. You should be ashamed of yourself. Okay, there's really bad blood between Austin's parents and Karmelo's parents. And he's making an allegation here that they abandoned him. There. Well, we don't know. No cameras, no microphones inside. We don't know who was where when all this was going on. But that's an allegation, and it's a demonstration of how bad the feelings are in this community, manifesting itself now through the victim's father. We go back. You never once admitted or took accountability. You tried to play victim. The real victim is the one who died, not the one who shoved a knife in his chest. It was a self-defense case, so both sides are claiming victimhood. The jury makes the determination based upon the evidence that the public did not see. Here's another part that he addressed, which was a big part of this story initially. I come to pray with you and show the world we can close the gap of this unbelievable racial divide. And what did you do? You widen that gap even further. He kicks me out of a press conference. Oh, funny. I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, but I left when asked. I didn't stab anyone. So there was a press conference that was held by Karmelo Anthony's parents early on in all of this. And Austin's father, Jeff Metcalf, goes to the press conference, and he's trying to have some sort of communication with Karmelo's parents and gets tossed from the press conference. This was posted on X by JD Miles 11 in April of 2025. He's the one with the sling there. He's talking to the deputies, and you see there's the press conference that's taking place, and he's asked to leave. And, you can think what you want. Was it appropriate, inappropriate for him to be there? But his whole point that he was making was, listen, from the beginning, I said this was not about race. I tried to, extend an olive branch by going there to meet, to talk, to discuss this together, not to not make this a racial case. And that was part of his point in what he was saying in these rants on the live stream. I want to put something else up for you here, because Karmelo Anthony's parents have now spoken. They went on the Breakfast Club, an extremely popular radio / podcast show. Mimi Brown said, and that's who's interviewing them, what did Karmelo tell you happened that day at the track meet? This is Drew Anthony, what he says. I mean, he was sitting there seeing his friend. If you once get the reports and everything, he was actually his girlfriend's cousin invited him to the tent. So they went, invited him to the tent. It was just, hey, what's going on, such and such. It was raining. He sat there. Then the next thing you know, you have these two guys who approached him. Even seeing the video in court, it was like, I know y'all see this. And this is the part that stuck out to me, is that Drew Anthony, Karmelo's father, says, hey, listen, that video shows what happened. But the question is, did it? Okay, so let's bring in Court TV anchor Cody Thomas, who was there in Texas, was there inside the courtroom, and actually saw this video because this is the problem, right? We had no cameras in the courtroom. The evidence hasn't been released. So the public is going by what people are saying. And there are a lot of people out there with an agenda on both sides who can describe what they believe they saw. Cody, you have no agenda other than telling us what you saw and what you observed. So why don't you describe for us what you saw when the video was played and what was testified to about that video? Because this is an important piece of evidence. And, you know, you've got people saying that it's very clear in the video what happened here.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the most important piece of evidence. It's kind of the crux of the whole case here. But the thing about this video, Vinny, and the prosecutors admitted this before it was presented while that forensic video analyst was on the stand, is that the video is not the best quality. It's, first of all, it's one of those, you know how a football stadium is set up and you have the big tall light posts that light the whole stadium. It seems like it's a camera on one of those light posts on the opposite side from where everything's going down. So when it's zoomed out, it looks pretty good quality. But when you have to zoom all the way in like this on a little blip, you know you're gonna lose a lot of pixelation there. It's gonna be really grainy. So they zoomed in, and you know now it looks like video you see at like a 7-Eleven. It's real grainy. You can kind of make out what's going on. You can see the yellow memorial tent. But again, they admitted there's no real distinguishables here. You're not seeing facial features. You're not seeing the logos of brands on clothing. So it's just a low quality video. But you see at one point in time, you see in the bleachers, you see the yellow tent. It's kind of at the center mass of the video. And then they zoom out just a tad so you can see Karmelo come up out of what's like the tunnel of the bleachers. You know, when you come up and you go sit around, he's coming up from under there. You see him come there and he stands there for a few seconds. And then he's walking towards this direction. So the tent's right here. He's walking towards the tent here. He's there at the tent for around 2 minutes. Then eventually you see Austin Metcalf and his 3 or 4 friends who were walking from the middle school where they were visiting their coach for a little bit that morning. They're walking from the opposite direction. So Karmelo's here for 2 minutes. They get there, and then the whole ordeal goes down in like 4.5 to 5 minutes. But under the tent, you got to remember there's a whole team under this tent. You can't see rainfall. All you see is there's people under a tent. They look like these humanoid blobs. You can tell they're human beings, but it's just a bunch of masses, right? You're not looking at who's sitting down, who's standing up, especially if they're intermixed in there. You know, maybe if they're at the front, you can see if they're sitting on the bleachers, but all in the crowd, you can't really see much of anything. And then what the media analyst highlights at one point in time, you see kind of one of these darker figures. There's like a jolt. And so they're saying that was kind of like the push. And then right after that little jolt, you see everyone disperse. And then, of course, they spot shadow. This was Karmelo because the other, I'm sure Memorial's team was in some dark gear because Karmelo had on a gray hoodie type situation. So he was in lighter clothing. Then you see him run off and they spot shadow him. And then you just see a bunch of disbursement. There was no, you don't see 2 hands, 1 hand sitting down, 2 people towering over. There's not really any real identifiables other than there's a memorial tent. Here's a bunch of people under there. This is what they say was a little jolt, which was the push, and then a bunch of disbursement. That's all you really see.
So sometimes, and I've seen this in trials, you go through a video and you may play it for different witnesses who were there. Mm-hmm. And then they, having been there, looking at the video, can kind of describe to you what's happening. Mm-hmm. Did any of that take place to try to clarify exactly what is going on and whether or not Karmelo Anthony is surrounded, whether or not a physical confrontation it's you can really tell how forceful the physical confrontation initially is?
I mean, in a very minor capacity, Vinny. I mean, because you got to remember, all of these students that testified under the state said there was no sort of surrounding that was happening. It was described as, this kind of one-on-one thing. And, actually in the closing arguments, the prosecutor was saying, they're trying to say the 2 brothers or all these multiple people were jumping on him. But on the body cam with the video, once he was apprehended, he was saying, I told him not to put his hands on me, not I told they not to put their hands on me. So that was a big deal in the closing arguments. But there was one student that got up there who was actually on the field warming up. And so you saw an angle of, a couple of kids on the field, and you saw the angle of where the tent was. And what they were trying to do there is kind of talk about how this student's timeline of when he walked over and saw the commotion just didn't add up, and trying to, like, kind of discredit his credibility a little bit. But no students were sitting there saying, yeah, that was me. You see me walking there, and then you see this push, and you see this person to the left, and they're moving up the bleachers. There was none of that real specificity, other than that one student on the field, just to show that his times weren't lining up when he said he walked over there, because they showed that he didn't walk at all when the moment of the stabbing happened.
So none of the witnesses who testified, right? Some of the people that were there didn't testify, but the ones who were called and testified that were under the tent, near the tent, all this, none of them could specifically identify themselves in that video?
No. There was one that, because he was kind of off to the side. We're talking under the tent right now, where the commotion comes up, and then there was one kid that said, "You see me coming over here," but he was very isolated. You know what I mean? He had nothing really to do with the situation happening under the tent, which is, why we were here in the first place. But other than that, none of them were saying, that's me. You see me over here. You see, this is Karmelo right there. They're the Metcalf brothers. The only thing that was really identifiable was when the forensic media analyst showed Karmelo walking to the tent, and then showed the Austin Metcalf and the other boys walking to the tent. Once things got to the tent, it was just, yeah, that's a crowd of people. You can't really tell what they're doing. You can't really tell that there's violence, or if it's horse playing, or if it's just people standing in a crowd. You can't really tell anything until they highlighted that little, they zoomed in real hard just to see this little whoop like that. And they were saying that's the push. And then 3 or 4 seconds after that is when all the, you see kids running in every which way. You see Karmelo run 3 or 4 bleachers up, and that's where the knife was found, about 3 or 4 bleachers up from where the stabbing happened. Then you see him run down, and he's running towards the track, and they zoom out and they show him just running near the fence line. But other than that, no one's sitting there saying, that's me, I was here. It was just their account of what was going on, but not related to the video, because we only watched the video at the beginning of the trial before some of these witnesses took the stand. The video was not played with every single witness. You know what I mean? So that wasn't the crux of the direct examination by the state once those student eyewitnesses took the stand.
Okay, so did the defense use the video that way at all? Did the defense show the video to the jury either during argument or during a direct or cross of their own witness or another witness and say, this is where Karmelo is surrounded?
They didn't do that at all. And, there's been a lot of criticism regarding the defense of Karmelo Anthony here with, 6 witnesses, a couple of student witnesses, one of those student witnesses that actually admitted that he believed Karmelo was the aggressor, a defense witness saying that. But the defense didn't use the video in any capacity, which, they didn't do that. They didn't explain even why he had a knife in the first place, which I thought that was something they would try to harp on a little bit, just saying, he had it because he liked to go camping. He had it because, you had to cut nylon if you're setting up the tent. They didn't even touch on why the knife was even there in the first place. It seemed like a lot of missed opportunities and holes in the defense's case, and especially after they ended somewhat abruptly. But to your point, Vinny, the video was not shown during the defense's case in any capacity.
And did they have any witness, either through their cross-examination or the direct examination of their own witnesses, who described Karmelo Anthony being surrounded or being confronted by a group?
Nothing group, nothing like that. There were multiple people. They all kind of described the same situation. They got into there. A lot of people were asking him to move. This is defense's witnesses now. Just want to reiterate. Asking him to leave. They saw commotion. They're looking around. They weren't scared. They just thought it was 2 boys, kind of going at it, saying whatever else to each other. But it was all
2 boys, not a situation of, I'm not going to say a gang, but a group of individuals, whether it's 2, 3, 4, sort of surrounding or physically confronting or intimidating all at the same time, all standing up and kind of getting around him.
None of that was testified to. There was testimony about Karmelo was still sitting and Austin was standing up, but it wasn't Austin and Hunter. It wasn't Austin, Hunter, and X, Y, and Z and all this different stuff. It was more so just those 2 boys, whether Karmelo was standing or sitting. The defense says he was sitting. That's the fact they were going on in the case, trying to say that, Austin was towering over him and Karmelo was trying to be calm and everything. But every account was that it was these 2 boys, nothing more.
Okay. So here's another question. And this is a bigger picture question, right? And obviously at Court TV, we believe cameras should be inside every courtroom in every case across the country. It should not be denied, but it is. Everyone has their own rules. Here in Texas, it's judicial discretion, so it's up to the judge to decide whether it comes in or out. If there was a camera inside that courtroom, do you think it would be clearer to the community, to the public, exactly why he was convicted?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If the public had transparency and heard just the sheer preparedness from the prosecution, every time the defense tried to get the ball rolling, the prosecutor had something ready to go. And in the way he presented his case, Vinny, I mean, I know you're a former prosecutor. You understand how these strategies work. It was very simplistic and digestible for the jury. For example, the defense called this one witness who was a student who knew Karmelo, went to school with Karmelo, and talked about, there was an argument about the tent culture, how tents were like locker rooms and you shouldn't be under them and this and that. This student was saying, no, track meets were very social. I'd be under the tent for 15 minutes with some of my friends if I saw them. I've actually been under the memorial tent with Karmelo. So he's going through all of this different stuff. And then the prosecutor gets up on cross-examination, is like, oh, so, they're very social. Yes, sir. If someone asked you or asked you to leave their tent, would you have stuck around? No, sir, I wouldn't. I probably would not have done that. So, I mean, there's the answer right there, right? Just simplistic questioning. Are you surprised that a knife was at a track meet? Yes, sir. Knives don't really come to track meets. No, sir. Were you surprised that, your teammate was the suspect here? Yes, sir. Just all of those sorts of simplistic, no matter how the defense tried to paint something. And, there were some moments where I was like, okay, here, the ball's rolling now. And as soon as the prosecutor gets up there, it's like, it's almost like he was trying to play more of the common sense, sort of play here. But I think if cameras were in there, public transparency always, as you said here at Court TV, is always important when it comes to these trials, so the community can understand and, not be so polarized. I mean, of course, there's going to be opinions and judgments on both sides, but I think it would have helped them see why this conviction came and he was ultimately sentenced to these 35 years.
Yeah. I mean, for the public trust in our system of government, which works for the people, like, you don't necessarily have to agree with the verdict, but maybe at least you would understand and say, oh yeah, like, whether you believe the defense attorneys didn't do a good job or witnesses went south or whatever happened, you may understand how the jury came to their conclusion. But where we are now, it's like the reaction to this, it's as polarizing as ever. Cody Thomas, Court TV anchor, working hard. Appreciate your time always, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me as always, Vinny. Happy to be here.
So I was a little surprised when I found out that the judge from the Karmelo Anthony case granted a TV interview. He did an interview with WFAA, spoke about a lot of things, but there was one thing that really caught my attention. Again, this is a TV interview. We have the audio. Let's take a listen.
I have seen from other cases around the country where cameras in the courtroom changed the way that the judge acted, the lawyers acted, some of the witnesses acted, and we were not going to have that here. We were going to really isolate the purpose for which we were here for, which is to have that fair trial, and cameras in the courtroom did not enter into that equation at all.
Objection. Judge arguing facts not in evidence. If you're a judge and a camera's in your courtroom and it changes the way you judge, that's your problem. That's not the problem with transparency. That's a problem with the judge. If a lawyer does anything other than try their case because a camera's in there, that's their problem. That's their mistake. That's their inability to be professional. But I'm surprised on a couple. All right, the judge didn't want cameras in the courtroom. I get it. We're going to talk about that, and I always talk about that. But he gave an interview about a case that just ended. Is this normal? Is this what always happens? Every state in our union has their own little set of local rules and practices and ethics, etc. So I didn't practice in Texas, so I've got to bring in one of Texas's best. He is a criminal defense attorney, special prosecutor, and probably the best criminal appellate attorney in the state of Texas. My friend, Brian Weiss, who I've probably known you longer than any other guest in the history of all my years at Court TV, Brian.
You know, what I've found doing what we do is never to argue with the host and kind of suck up. So, yeah, Vinny, you couldn't be more correct. Look, you and I have known each other longer than most people have been married, certainly most of the people that you and I know have been on the air with. A couple of quick takes. Number one, I know Judge Roach. I met Judge Roach when I was a special prosecutor in the Ken Paxton case, investigating and prosecuting the Attorney General, now Republican nominee for junior senator, because that all happened initially out of the Collin County Courthouse where this trial was. And I heard nothing but good things about Judge Roach. I maybe even met him at a seminar. But number one, when I talk to judges and lawyers and prosecutors at seminars about dealing with the media, it's one thing for a prosecutor or a defense attorney to go on the air. I don't think there should ever be a case where a judge, the guy that calls balls and strikes and wears the dress and everything, should go on the air unless it's in some educational capacity. And I know what this judge's clip was not particularly incendiary. That's the other take. I could not disagree with him more. And again, I think, Vinny, you and I, are cut from the same cloth because we're old Court TV alums back in 93 and 94. And you make a great point, not just to suck up. If you as a judge, if you as a jurist are in any way, shape, or form impacted or affected by the fact that there's a camera, which is so unobtrusive that I found people forget about it in the first 90 seconds, then you should not be behind home plate in Game 7 of the World Series. You ought to be working at Chick-fil-A. The other thing is that if you are going to let witnesses or advocates play to the camera, and again, the three most cliched things in America, French cuisine, Notre Dame football, and lawyers playing to the camera, nonsensical at best.
It is. You're not playing to the camera. You're playing to the jury. Like, the lawyers are playing to the jury. The jury makes the decision. The jury decides whether they win or lose. That's who they play to. I mean, I've covered, this isn't the first high-profile case that we've covered through the years. There was another one that had sort of the racial tension that this one had, involving a victim named George Floyd. And the judge in that case, Judge Cahill, the state of Minnesota had never had a camera in a courtroom, but Judge Cahill was smart enough, knowing that case for that community and for the nation was important for the nation to see the evidence and hear it so they could understand the verdict and understand the way the evidence went in. And whatever you believed about the evidence in the case, the bottom line was prosecutors won that case. Their expert was amazing. The defense expert was meh. And that made a huge difference in the case. And that's what the transparency showed. And if you don't agree with it, you have a basis to not agree with it because you get to see and hear everything. Will this be a problem, the fact that the judge spoke about a trial right after? My father was a federal judge. And, the rules were you don't talk about any case. You don't talk about any case that still is open to motions and appeals, et cetera. Judge Belvin Perry, in that case down in Florida involving Kaylee Marie Anthony, the victim, he spoke after he retired, and that was a case where it was a not guilty verdict, so there were no appeals, right? So what are your thoughts there? Is that going to be any sort of a lingering issue potentially, or nothing? It's just more of, he decided to do it. Maybe it wasn't in the best taste, but he did it anyway.
I agree. I'm at the hashtag, rookie mistake. In the panoply of potential legal issues that this case involves, and there are a couple of good ones. No.
We're going to talk about those in a minute.
No, exactly.
But how about this one, though?
Not at all. It was an innocuous, 45-second bite that had nothing to do with the merits, that did not call into question the judge's impartiality. Because in addition to talking to lawyers and judges and prosecutors all throughout the country on dealing with the media, one of the other things that I've kind of become the expert on, and, remember what Mark Twain said about experts, experts just some guy from out of town, is trial court recusal. And, what will get you bounced, quicker than anything I can think of. And going on the air and talking about a pending case or an issue even likely to come before you. One of the cases that I talk about was unfortunately an incredibly tragic case, the Oklahoma City bombing case. And the first federal judge assigned to that case decided that he was going to go on Nightline, a program back in the day that was a pretty big deal with Ted Koppel. And I think most members of this gen are like, Nightline? Is that like a nightlight? And the judge ended up getting recused. Why? Because he evinced a take, if you will, that while not directly impacting a bias or prejudice, certainly in the minds of a member of the public, and this is what the test is, whether a reasonable member of the public on 6th Avenue between 52nd and 53rd, knowing all the facts and circumstances, would have a reasonable doubt about that judge's ability to be fair. Now, Judge Roach's clip, no big deal. Would not, as his consigliere, have advised him to do that. Right. But so what?
Well, so let's get back then to the focus of what, the part that we played, which is that the issue of cameras and transparency and the impact it has. Because what we've seen in the aftermath of this case is everybody is talking about the evidence like it showed something, and there's opposite interpretations of evidence, and it's nothing that the public has seen for themselves. We're only hearing about it through people who have their own bias or spin on it, one side or the other. It doesn't matter. And the public didn't get to see it in a case that is charged the way this one is charging the community and dividing the community, and people seeing it so differently. No one actually got to see it except for the few people who stood in line and got into the courtroom. And to me, that is the travesty here, is that it's a public courtroom. It doesn't belong to the judge. It doesn't belong to the lawyers. And there should be an ability for the public to be able to see it. Like, it doesn't interfere with anything other than provide transparency.
And, I'm going to quote noted legal sage Woody Allen. I think it was in Bananas. This is a farce of a mockery of an outrage of an injustice. Look, there were only a handful of seats, number one. And the people who were in there were, other than members of the media, virtually everybody else kind of had their own agenda, because this case has been on, TV and the internet more than Flo the Insurance Lady and Leave It to Beaver reruns. And some of these people, and this is a legal term we use, Vin, are morons. I mean, just don't understand it. And what Judge Roach could have done is that he could have done what a lot of judges do when they don't want to send out the actual trial over broadcast TV, is to create what we call, and I know you're familiar with the term, an overflow room, where members of the media or members of the public can watch the trial in real time, and it's a closed circuit TV feed that's not going to be distributed.
Yeah, but for court TV, that's like, we went to the prom, but my date was my cousin. Like,
exactly.
It's not perfect, but at least more eyeballs get onto the evidence, and maybe you'll have some more perspectives of it. But to me, the ultimate thing is it's the people's courtroom. It doesn't belong to anyone else. And I know you're trying to balance all this. Just give me a short answer on this one. Did you agree with the gag order? Because one of the other things that has happened now is that Austin's father finally got to speak, and it was raw. It was emotional. It was wow. But he was not permitted to speak beforehand. I'm offended by that, because I believe in the First Amendment. I believe it's first for a reason. What are your thoughts about gagging people who are not the lawyers in a case?
Wrong from here to there. Stevie Wonder can see that. The leading case in Texas on gag orders in criminal cases, if I can say so, is my case. It's a case called In Re Benton, involving a killing that happened about 5 minutes from my house, involving a 16-year-old high school student who looked like a young Angelina Jolie. We got it set aside. It is the law. I actually represented Dallas County Criminal District Attorney John Crusoe, a good friend, about 30 miles down the highway from where the Anthony case was tried, when a judge tried to hold him in contempt for violating a gag order that had more holes than the freaking Iraqi Navy. No, gag orders, I've never seen a gag order that could ultimately withstand review. And the ultimate sanction, the ultimate backstop for people who run their mouths is the inherent power of the court to punish for contempt. I don't believe in gag orders any more than I believe in the tooth fairy.
So a notice of appeal has been filed by Karmelo Anthony, and that is the precursor to filing the actual appeal. So as you would expect, you're convicted of murder. You're sentenced to 35 years. you probably want to see if you can get a new trial, a second look, a second chance in all this. So, Brian Weiss, you're an appellate expert as well, and that's, anytime I have a question about Texas law, you're on speed dial. I don't know if I still have speed dial, but if I still had speed dial, you'd be on it.
I'd be on it again.
Let me start with the first issue that I was shocked by. And again, I didn't get to actually see the testimony because the judge did not allow us to see it. But the reporting is that each eyewitness kind of finished their testimony by saying this was not self-defense. Is that okay? Because I thought that's what the trial was about, and I thought that was the question that the jury had to answer, whether or not it was self-defense. Can lay witnesses in their testimony tell the jury, in their own opinion, that it was not self-defense?
The short answer is they're not supposed to. And this is one of the ironies or oddities, if you will, about the criminal justice system. The only kind of criminal case where a layperson can give the ultimate opinion as to guilt or innocence is, of all things, a DWI case, or DUI, as they say in some states, because everybody knows what intoxication is. Self-defense is a question of law that ultimately the jury decides based on the facts. Now, a witness can testify. You can't, I don't think you should be able to answer a shove with a stab like Bill Worski so ably argued. Or you could say that I believe that Karmelo Anthony had an opportunity to retreat, that is to leave the tent. But I was shocked that these lay witnesses, if you will, were permitted to testify as to the ultimate legal conclusion. That's an issue. But it's interesting because I thought the issue that I thought you were going to lead with is the Batson claim.
Oh, all right. Well, I know you want to go there. But let's just start here. Is that a big deal? The fact that the witnesses said this was not self-defense, 0 to 10, just give it a number, how big of a deal it is.
On its own, on the merits, it could be a 7. But if I could just kind of throw something in that I think your viewers would want to know about the appellate process, appellate courts don't sit to review questions of guilt or innocence. They review whether or not the trial was fundamentally fair based on legal rulings that the court made. And there's something called the harmless error rule. And that's because nobody's perfect. We recruit all the participants, the judge, the prosecutor, the defense lawyer, the witnesses, the cops, from the human race, which means there's going to be human error. And so there are going to be mistakes. And because the Constitution doesn't entitle you, not even in New Jersey, to a perfect trial, you're entitled to a fair one. So I believe that while that could be classified as a legal mistake, what we call error, E-R-R-O-R, an appellate court could find that based on the allegedly overwhelming evidence that it didn't impact the outcome of the proceeding. But again, that's a potential issue. Make no mistake.
Yeah, I thought it was a big issue because it wasn't just one witness. It was like witness after witness after witness. All right, let's get to what you thought my lead was going to be. And I was debating between the two. The fact that there were no black jurors. And you talked about Batson challenges. Let's talk about that. What's going on there? Is that a real issue in this case at the appellate level?
That is, as we say in journalism, that's the lead that you don't want to bury. And I know that enough of your viewers have probably binge watched Law and Order or seen you on the air talking about what Batson is. But Batson comes from, I believe, a 1984 Supreme Court case called Batson versus Kentucky, and that has been modified over the years, that essentially says that while a prosecutor can exercise as many challenges for cause as he or she can, that is based on a juror's inability to follow the law, that they can only exercise their peremptory challenges for reasons that are not related to race or for any racial reason or for any racial pretext. So what, in essence, this case presents, as I understand it, because again, I followed it, but I followed it on, this device right here, is that there were 3 black potential jurors, what we call veneer members in Texas, who were struck by the prosecutor peremptorily, meaning for no reason at all, is based on their 10 that both sides get in Texas in a felony. And once the defendant, in this case, Mr. Anthony's lawyers make what we call a prima facie case. Judge, on the record outside the jury's presence, now that the jury's seated, I want to note for the record there are no African-American jurors. And I want the court to note for the record that the prosecutor exercised X number of challenges on black jurors. At that point, the court will say, fine, the defendant has made a prima facie case. Mr. Worski, I want you to tell the court for the record why you struck those black jurors. And my understanding is that they were struck because I think they were not necessarily teachers, but educators who might have felt sympathy for a 17-year-old kid if they're around 17-year-old kids all the time. Now, once that happens, the prosecution has initially rebutted that claim that you used your challenges improperly. It's then incumbent upon the defense attorney, and this is where it's tricky. You have to show that potential jurors, veneer members, who were similarly situated to these three black educators who were struck or not struck, and they were white. So my understanding is that there were white veneer members who may have been teachers or educators who were not struck. If that's the only reason, I love that issue.
That's a home run, right? So you have black teachers, white teachers, prosecutors get rid of the black teachers, but don't get rid of the white teachers. And then all of a sudden their reasoning for getting rid of the potential black jurors kind of falls by the wayside because you didn't, everything else is the same.
Exactly.
Except the fact of what color their skin is.
Right. And the word that we use, you use the legal expression falling apart, which I like. It's called a pretext. That basically this is, BS. And I have one back.
All right, 0 to 10, give me a number because I have one more issue I want to get to.
8 or 9.
Okay, so that's a big one. That's a big one. All right, the final one, everyone talks about this all the time. I know some lawyers don't like it. Ineffective assistance of counsel.
I knew, look at you. My dad used to say when I would answer a question he didn't think I could answer, he'd say, you just look like you don't know anything. Well, Vinny Mazel tov. I thought that was beyond your keen, as we say. That's a great question. And this is why. I have done, as an appellate lawyer and post-conviction writ lawyer over 4.5 decades, a bunch of ineffective assistance, motions for new trial, direct appeals, and post-conviction writs, including a death penalty case that I won 20 years ago in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Let me tell you what the problem is that lawyers like me who involve themselves in ineffective assistance cases are basically like internal affairs, like the shoe flies, the rat squad. Why? Because what you're doing is you're claiming that defense attorneys are morons, prosecutors are cheaters, and judges are ignoramuses. And as you can tell, I can tell by that Jersey smirk, it's going to make you a widely popular guy. You're going to be as popular as P. Diddy. And so it's a very touchy subject, particularly 1, high-profile case, 2, racial element, 3, I don't know about the lead lawyer, this guy named Mike Howard, who we can talk about in a minute, but second chair counsel is a guy who I know, who I've lectured with, who I've put on CLEs, a guy named Toby Shook. And when he was a prosecutor in the Dallas County DA's office, he was a legend. He was a cult figure. And it's a small world after all, sound bites from this trial is that he and Bill Worski go back forever. And they were special prosecutors in an incredibly high-profile case right down Interstate 35 from this courthouse, where a judge and his wife were killed in Kaufman County. So they've been together. They've been on opposite sides. I think Toby's a great lawyer. I'm not sure how much Toby actually did in this case, again, because there were no cameras in the courtroom. Mike Howard, I don't know the guy, so I'm not going to opine, but I know this, that with all of the money that the defendant and mom and dad were able to amass via Kickstarter, GoFundMe, whatever it was, and there was a lot, there are other lawyers, not just in the Metroplex, but within Texas, who I would have hired. Mike High School, probably pound for pound, not just one of the best lawyers in Texas, who also happens to be, coincidentally, African-American and from Fort Worth, or lawyers from my part of the state, Dan Cogdill, Ken Schaefer, Derek Hansworth, Rusty Harden. Those are the guys who I think the call probably should have gone out to. But to your point about ineffective assistance, let me tell you what point 1 under ineffective assistance is. Well, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to be the host. Vinny, thanks for joining us today. What do you think the best claim of ineffective assistance is that Karmelo Anthony's new lawyer will have?
Did not prepare for the punishment phase
Oh
of
my
the
God, look
trial.
at you.
Presented no case.
Golf clap. You're
So I got it right. I got it right.
Hit it out of the
All
park.
right.
Hit it in the Crawford boxes. No question. And yeah, I think anybody who, again, wasn't in the courtroom but followed the case knew that. My understanding is that they called mom, asked her a couple of questions, and then said, thanks for being on the show. I have been successful. I've been blessed over however many years of winning a number of cases, and serious cases, including Galen Walby, the only then death row inmate from Galveston, in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is kind of like climbing Everest in your shorts, based on the failure to investigate and prepare for punishment stage. This is why this matters, and this is why I like it with the but that we'll talk about in a minute. What most lawyers don't understand is that most cases are punishment cases, that the defendant in a felony case is the visiting team down by 3 scores in the first period. Full stop. And if you have not prepared for the eventuality, for the virtual certainty of a punishment hearing, then again, you've got no business in a courtroom. That means lining up a smorgasbord, a cavalcade, a panoply of mom, dad, aunts, uncles, cousins, siblings, coaches, teachers, people who knew this kid best, number one. Number two is I also think this kid's 17. And what we like to tell jurors in a situation where we've got a youngster is that our lives are motion pictures. They're not snapshots. Do not judge this 17-year-old kid whose brain may not be fully formed on the worst day of his life, which means you need an expert. You sit this kid down with a shrink, a psychologist or psychiatrist, to talk about how he's young, what he may have thought was reasonable, and how the best cure for crime is old age. To me,
and the bottom line, though, the bottom line for that is, listen, you know, you're not arguing for innocence at that point. What you're doing is trying to mitigate the damage, mitigate the punishment, and get him sentenced to something less than 35 years and closer to, I don't know, 10 or 15.
Exactly. And that's a great point. And this is what's key. In Texas, we have a system involving murder versus manslaughter. And so back in the day before the law changed like 25 years ago, a jury could consider manslaughter is a separate crime with a separate punishment range of 2 to 20. The legislature said, now let's just make it a punishment issue. So you get found guilty of murder during the guilt innocent stage, and then at punishment, you get what's called a special issue. If you find from the evidence that the defendant acted as a result of sudden passion arising from an adequate cause, that is the kind of response that anger, rage, terror, or resentment would bring in an ordinary person. Can't believe I remember that. Then this is manslaughter, and the penalty range is 2 to 20. While you can litigate that, and generally do litigate that during guilt innocence, you can also litigate it during the punishment stage. I didn't see anything at all, nothing, zero, zip, nada, that was related at all to the special issue. And when you have a cap on 20, it's a lot different than a cap on 99 or life.
Big difference. Take a look at this photo. This is Karmelo Anthony's newest mugshot. And looks a little different, looks a lot different. Shaved his head, obviously. But when you compare the initial mugshot with the subsequent mugshot, you can kind of see the transformation of someone who's newly arrested to someone who's now been convicted of murder and going away to prison for 35 years. But what does 35 years mean in the state of Texas? Brian Weiss, what's the reality of 35 years in prison in Texas for someone who at the time this occurred was a teenager, was 17 years old?
Let me put it to you like this, Vin. I'm not sure that Karmelo's parole officer has been born, but maybe his parents are dating right now. The reality of it is that Karmelo has to do 50% day for day. So do the math. What is that? Like 17 and a half before he even takes a peek at the parole board. And as the judge instructed the jury, eligibility for parole does not guarantee parole. And the problem that you have with high profile cases, and I've seen it in a number of cases, not the least of which was the Susan Wright case that Court TV covered back in the day, is that the parole board doesn't like high profile defendants. And so the problem you're going to have is you can continue to get what we call set-offs. And parole in the Texas system, what I would suggest is that, and it's obviously premature, is there are lawyers, a couple of good ones. Most of these guys are scam artists, three-card Monte people, but there are a couple of good ones who I really think this family could think about hiring in the next, decade and a half. Ben.
Let's put aside the notoriety of the case. If this was a regular case, when I say regular, I mean a case that doesn't capture the nation's attention, right? And it's a 17-year-old, gets sentenced when he's 19, doesn't really have much credit or whatever. What are the factors that the parole board will consider 17 and a half years down the road?
Well, I think first and foremost is acceptance of responsibility, which is problematic for any defendant who comes in and pleads not guilty and says, I was wrongfully convicted, I didn't do it. So I think age, prior criminal history, acceptance of responsibility, remorse, and then how the victim's family feels. And again, I alluded to the Susan Wright case. Susan Wright was a housewife in West Houston in 2002 who stabbed her abusive husband 193 times, still the Olympic, AAU, and NCAA records, and buried him in the backyard. And part of the problem that Susan had with parole was that, not understandably, the victim's family's like, this woman is the devil, and if there's a heaven, she's not in it. But talking about those kinds of considerations at this point is, I know a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That's a very, very, very long way off. This kid's best shot right now, unless he wants to be released when we're planting tomatoes on Mars, is the appellate process to the Fifth Court of Appeals in Dallas. And as you pointed out, I don't know what they're doing in terms of changing lawyers, but there are a couple of names that the family calls me and I'm like, this is who you need to talk to. I know the kid signed the pauper's oath, but what I would do is that I would immediately start lining up a panoply, a bevy of punishment witnesses who were either interviewed or called, my expert, and to basically present the punishment case at the motion for new trial that wasn't presented. Wait,
right?
The punishment hearing.
I get it. But let's go back to the parole part of this, right?
Sure.
And we spent some time in this episode talking about the bad blood between the families. It would seem to be in Karmelo Anthony's family's best interest to mend those fences, right? To try to create, if they have a relationship with Jeff Metcalf and with Hunter, Austin's twin brother, if there is some sort of moment of coming together, that could be Karmelo's best opportunity to get parole sometime down the road if Jeff Metcalf speaks, and says, okay, he's been punished, and Hunter, and there's some sort of coming together, some level of healing there, rather than where there seem to be going now, which is in the opposite direction of that.
Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that Khloe Kardashian has a better shot of winning the Heisman Trophy than that happening. That's not going to happen.
Why? Why is that not going to happen?
Because there are so many things about this case, not the least of which is the hot button third rail element of race, that I think that it's highly unlikely in the short term. And let me say this while I'm at it. I see that the mom and dad have done a series of interviews with some, market 290 whatever affiliate. You've got to turn down the volume on this right now, because all of this that's been going on outside the Collin County Courthouse, where I spent a bunch of time, that's not helpful. I know people are angry. I know people want to vent, but courts of appeals and trial judges don't want to think that their decisions are impacted in any way, shape, or form by public clamor or outcry.
Big breaking news. We are moments away from finding out the verdict in the Karmelo Anthony murder trial out of Texas. Karmelo Anthony accused of murdering another student from a different high school at a track meet, Austin Metcalf. Karmelo Anthony claimed self-defense, but did not take the stand to tell his story to the jury. And now No cameras, no microphones inside that courtroom, but we do have Cody Thomas in there, and we're getting information from Cody from inside the courtroom. Now, extremely tense situation in that courtroom with families of the victim, families of the defendant on either side of the courtroom, including Austin's twin brother, Hunter, expected inside that courtroom. So a very tense situation there with everything at stake. That's inside the courtroom for those who are closest to what happened that day, the families. But there's another whole situation taking place outside the courthouse, and very tense out there as well, as you have protesters, counter protesters, supporters, people who believe one side or the other. And let me tell you, some of those folks are going to be extremely unhappy with whatever this verdict is. And some may very well believe that justice was served. But it's going to be an intense situation there, outside the courthouse, as they learn the fate of Karmelo Anthony. Is he guilty of the murder of Austin Metcalf, or did the jury believe that this was a killing that was justified and self-defense, and they'll find him not guilty? This is a tense moment. It's tense inside the courtroom, but we're just watching and waiting to hear from inside the courtroom, and you've got to wait for the families to get in there. Everyone's got to be seated. Everyone has to be ready before the judge takes the bench. Judge will take the bench, and then we'll ask the attorneys if they have any final questions or issues, and then they'll call for the jury. Then when the jury comes in, the note with the verdict is usually handed to the judge, and the judge reads it, makes sure it's signed and everything is in order. So before anyone else knows, the judge knows the verdict. So sometimes I like to look at the judge to read their face, and it's difficult, very difficult. And then the reading of the verdict. So we are just moments away from finding out if Karmelo Anthony will spend potentially the rest of his life behind bars or be set free by this jury in this unusual self-defense case where the defendant chose not to testify. So much at stake here for everyone involved. Obviously, the family of Austin Metcalf, they want justice. They want justice. Austin's twin brother, who was there that day, wants justice. They'll never get closure. Austin is gone. But families of victims who've been murdered or have been killed, they want a sense of, okay, someone's been held responsible. We'll never forget our loved one, but we can turn the page and attempt to move on. For now, the defendant, Karmelo Anthony, who believes he is 100% innocent, who believes he was the victim that day, who believes he was saving his own life by taking the life of Austin Metcalf, for he and his family, as we've been talking about, just a teenager. The rest of his life is in the balance here as well. So for both sides, the intensity is impossible to understand unless you've been in those shoes. I've been reporting on this for years, and I can only report what people have told me. But I can't imagine what it's like on either side of that courtroom. And inside the courtroom right now, things are starting to fill up. The families are in the courtroom. The gallery is there, and the seats are starting to fill up. We are just moments away from finding out what this jury has to say after 3 hours of deliberations, which was a pretty normal amount of time for a trial that was this quick, that was this short. Doesn't require the longest deliberation. So I wouldn't say it was short. It wasn't long. It was just about normal, maybe a little quick, but sometimes justice is a little quicker in the state of Texas. Inside the courtroom now for the very first time is Hunter Metcalf. That's Austin's twin brother, who was there that day, who was a witness to some of what happened here, if not all of what happened, but was not called by either side as a witness to testify. So he's in the courtroom. The defendant, Karmelo Anthony, in the courtroom as well. And this is a tense moment. It's a tense moment outside the courthouse as well, as everyone is gathering in anticipation of this verdict. which not everyone's going to like. Whatever it is, not everyone is going to like it. Some people may celebrate it. Others are going to hate it. It's that kind of case. It's that kind of a moment. Guilty of murder. Guilty of murder. Karmelo Anthony has been found guilty of the murder of Austin Metcalf. 3 hours of deliberation, and the jury has spoken. I want to show you some video now from outside of the courthouse where things have been extremely tense throughout all of this as the crowd outside learns of the verdict. Let's take a look.
I thought it was manslaughter too. They saying guilty of murder on Fox right now. They saying guilty of murder. They saying guilty of murder.
Y'all know y'all wrong. Come on. I swear to God, I'm sick of I'm tired of this. I am tired. I don't give a tired. That is sick. That is sick. That is sick. You went through the same
guilty of murder. Guilty of murder, y'all. Guilty of murder.
This is a strange way for a case like this for the public to find out, right? People who are obviously invested in what happened here, perhaps in their community. But at the end of the day, like, you take cameras outside of a courthouse, this is what you end up with, people trying to figure it out. Now, the good news is, obviously, there's no chaos. There is no chaos. But the long question here is, you get a verdict, but you don't see the evidence. You don't hear the testimony. Do you trust that verdict? So let's talk about what this means and how this impacts everything, right? Starting number one, they absolutely rejected the self-defense claim. But remember, this was a self-defense claim, very unusual, where the person, Karmelo Anthony, claiming self-defense, didn't testify, did not testify. Yes, there were witnesses to what happened, but none of those witnesses could take you inside the mind of Karmelo Anthony to explain what he was seeing, what he was feeling, and why he was doing what he was doing. And his side does not get explained from his perspective. It's explained by a lawyer, You want a jury to send someone home after stabbing them in the chest, someone who is unarmed. You want to send them home. You've got to give them a reason. And the reason has to come from the defendant themselves. We've watched cases here at Court TV for years. Just recently, one in Connecticut where the defendant testified. Kyle Rittenhouse, where the defendant testified to tell his story. If you don't tell the story, if you don't let the jury know what you are seeing, feeling, and thinking at the moment that you grab a knife and put it into the chest of another human being, what else do you expect as a result? So now Karmelo Anthony, this teenager, convicted of murder, will now face 5 to 99 years in prison. And Texas is different than most states. Whether you like it or hate it, many states you're convicted of murder, it's almost automatic, the sentence you get. And the question becomes with or without parole, concurrent or consecutive. Those are the issues we talk about after a murder conviction. But not in Texas. The jury or the judge is given leeway, a range of sentences that could be extremely light or extremely heavy, which is why this is just the first battle in this case. This is just the first hill. Yeah, okay, you've got the conviction prosecutors or the defense you've lost, right? You've been found guilty. But now there's another battle. How much time does he serve for what he did? What's his punishment? And that's what they call it in Texas. Texas, when you're a convicted felon and you're convicted at trial or you plead guilty, they talk about not your sentence, but your punishment for what you did. So this now is where the rest of Karmelo Anthony's life comes into play, but also Austin Metcalf's, because you've got to talk about the loss, the impact, and the impact on the family, and the lasting impact that this case has also on the community. But this is now where the defense has an opportunity to talk about everything that Karmelo Anthony did or accomplished in his life up until the point that he pulled out that knife and murdered Austin Metcalf. The word from inside the courtroom is that Karmelo Anthony and his side of the courthouse or courtroom in tears as they now proceed to the punishment phase and find out what's going to happen here. And in Texas, going directly from verdict to punishment is interesting because in many jurisdictions, we take a week, 2 weeks, 2 months between the verdict and the sentencing. And there's an investigation, there's a report, there's everything else. No, in Texas, you got to be ready. You got to be ready as a convicted felon now to talk to this jury and explain to them why Karmelo Anthony deserves a second chance. That's what it's about now. It's about whether or not this teenager ever sees the light a day again. And for prosecutors, how do they feel about it? What do they feel is proper when a life has been taken? When a young life has been taken and stolen? Well, you had witness after witness after witness. And they were consistent in what they were saying. Now, it's not, everyone's not exactly the same in terms of what they saw, but there was a thread of consistency throughout all of it. That number one, Karmelo Anthony was under a tent, and maybe he was welcomed at first, but at some point when people noticed, he was asked to leave. Then he was told to leave. And that's when the confrontation started because he refused to leave. Why did he refuse to leave? Was he at that moment provoking a confrontation? And that's the argument, successful argument by prosecutors. Because Karmelo Anthony is the one who is escalating this from, okay, you're here, can you please leave? Or you're here, get out of our tent, from being somewhere to now upping the ante. Touch me, see what happens. Touch me, see what happens. Touch me, see what happens. That's what the testimony was, is that he was repeating that, inviting it as his hand was inside his bag. And we know what was inside the bag. The knife. And it was a pocket knife, but it wasn't folded up. It was a knife that was ready. And why was the knife in his gym bag to begin with? It's a track meet. It's a track meet. Now, it's not an illegal knife. We learned that. It's not illegal to possess it, but there are rules. And then it goes beyond the rules. It goes to the mindset, the intent. Why did you bring the knife? Well, that's something that needed to be explained by Karmelo Anthony, something that was not explained by Karmelo Anthony. It keeps coming back to someone claiming self-defense and not telling the jury why he did it, what he was thinking. Why did you bring the knife? Why did you go under the tent? Why didn't you leave the tent? Why did you keep and continually challenge Austin Metcalf, touch me, see what happens? The jury now has got to take him at his word as told by other witnesses that he's provoking a confrontation. And he knows that if Austin puts a hand on him, he's got a knife. And when you look at self-defense generally, juries don't like it and don't give you the benefit of the doubt if you're the one instigating the confrontation. In Texas, it's actually part of the law and the jury instruction that if you provoke, if you're the one who provokes the situation through your words and or actions, you cannot claim self-defense. And that's how self-defense gets defeated. in Texas. And that's appropriate. Like, that law is appropriate. You don't want people provoking a situation and then claiming self-defense afterwards. Like, you started it, you don't get to finish it and claim self-defense. That's basically the thought and the reasoning behind the law. And in practice, you know, there's always gray area as to who's provoking a fight, who's starting it. And that becomes a question of fact for the jury. But it seems clear that this jury found that Karmelo Anthony was the one not only provoking the situation, but escalating the level of confrontation to go from verbal to challenging someone to touch him. And then at that moment, going from a physical touching of the shoulder, which was either a touching, a pushing, or a shoving. It wasn't a punch, but at worst, it was a shoving. Can you go from shoving someone to then someone pulling out a knife and stabbing you? The argument was Karmelo is seated, Austin is standing. Austin is surrounded by friends. Austin is much larger than Karmelo. Austin's twin brother is there. I mean, all of those were the arguments. But at the end of the day, two people in a confrontation, one has a weapon and only one survives. And the one who survived never told his story. Never told his story. You know, the closest that I've ever seen to a not guilty in a self-defense without the defendant testifying was George Zimmerman, Trayvon Martin. But the defendant there did tell his story, and the jury heard his story. Because when he was questioned by police recorded on video the entire conversation. So George Zimmerman told his whole story, and prosecutors put that evidence in. I don't know why they did, but they did. So it eliminated the need for George Zimmerman to tell the jury his story, because he told the story to investigators the day after it happened on video. So there I was surprised Zimmerman didn't take the stand and the jury found him not guilty. But then I thought about, well, but they did hear his entire story from his perspective. It was a long video. I mean, it's like 20 minutes. And he's explaining his thought process throughout it. He's explaining physically what happens and what he's thinking about, which is what a jury needs. Because you're telling the jury, yeah, I did it. I killed another human being. But you got to let me go because it was justified. Well, why was it justified? Karmelo didn't answer that question. That's how we got here. So where do we go from here? The punishment phase now is as big as the verdict because of this incredible range of 5 to 99 years. Like anywhere. And I've seen juries in Texas and judges in Texas come back with some very unexpected punishments for serious crimes. And sometimes that's where the compromise comes in, right? Like, yeah, he did it, but you know what? You know, there were some other things in play here, not his whole life. So think about now, what is at stake? If you're a teenager, right? You're 17, 18 years old. Are you getting out in your 20s? You getting out in your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe never. And if you're the defense attorney, you've got to be prepared for this moment. You can't go in there presuming you're going to win. I mean, in death penalty cases where they have the penalty phase, that's the first thing that most defense attorneys work on is, okay, what do we do if they find him or her guilty and we're going to a penalty phase? So we got to prepare that. Karmelo Anthony better hope that his attorneys were prepared for this moment. You can believe in your case. You can believe your client is not guilty all along. But that doesn't negate the possibility. And in this case, I mean, really, the probability of him being found guilty. So now, the arguments you make, whether they're legal arguments, whether you've had evaluations done, whether you bring in everyone under the sun to talk about his character and everything that he did, everything he accomplished throughout his entire childhood. That's what we're talking about. and give them a reason why. Because you're really asking for a second chance. I think because most of us presume when you're convicted of murder, that's it. You're done. You get one murder and you're done. But now you're literally asking for a second chance. And the youthfulness of the offender will likely come into play as a potential factor. Younger defendants generally get sentenced to lesser time or given a little bit more benefit at sentencing than someone who's in their 30s, 40s, or 50s. You know, their brains are, you know, as developed as any murderer's brain could be. But when you're 17 years old, when you do this, I mean, that's an issue, right? You can even bring in an expert, talk about the development of the brain. All of that is what you need to do ahead of time. You're not scrambling now. Those witnesses and everyone should be there and ready to go, because this is part of what we are dealing with. It's not just about the guilt now. It's about the punishment when you have an offender, a killer, a murderer who is just a teenager. Will he get a second chance? Okay, word from inside the courtroom, exactly what's happening. Both sides in the punishment phase waived their opening statements to the jury who's making this decision. And now the state has rested without calling any witnesses. They're going to rely upon the facts and the evidence that they presented at the trial, which is interesting, right? When you're talking about aggravating factors and mitigating factors, my guess is that the state of Texas believes the circumstances surrounding this case prove all the aggravating factors that need to be proven. Victim impact, separate from the proof in front of a jury. Victim impact is usually reserved for the judge before making a sentence final and official. So, fascinating maneuvering inside of the courtroom. The question is, how much or how prepared is the defense for this moment? Because you can't let it just slide by. You've got to put people up there. You've got to explain who Karmelo Anthony is, who Karmelo Anthony was, what he has to offer, how he could perhaps benefit society from being given a second chance. So now we've just learned that the defense put one witness up there, Karmelo Anthony's mother, pleading for mercy. That's it. That's it. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you're not prepared and lined up for this moment in doing everything and anything you possibly can to convince the jury that just found that your client murdered an innocent young man. How you're not trying to show them something else. Another opportunity for Karmelo Anthony to testify. Now, it's dangerous, right? Because the jury's found him guilty already. So is he going to say, I'm not guilty? You don't do that. You don't do that at that point. At that point, you try to explain who you are. You try to explain what you have to offer to society, what your role can be, and why you need a second chance. So I want to bring in Cody Thomas, who is inside that courtroom all day long for all of this and has the details and the big details about the sentencing or the punishment in this case, Cody, because the verdict is one thing. We've talked about that. I want to get some more info from you, but reveal the actual sentence, the punishment for Karmelo Anthony.
Yeah, Benny, just minutes ago, right before I walked out here, the jury came back in, sentenced Karmelo Anthony to 35 years. behind bars. They had up to 99 years. The scale was 5 to 99. They decided to not go with the sudden passion defense, the alternative the defense was trying to present, trying to say that, all of this came about in the moment. If that would have been the case, it would have had 2 to 20 years. But they decided that was not the case. So 5 to 99, they settled on 35 years, Vinny. So he has a long time to spend behind those bars.
Well, yes, but no at the same time, right? It's a murder conviction. He was facing the rest of his life. He's only 19 years old. He gets 35 years. In Texas, you're eligible for parole at 50% under these circumstances. So, a few years after Mackenzie Shirilla is applying for parole, he'll be able to apply for parole in this case. He may not get it, but at least there's some light at the end of the tunnel for this guy. What was the scene inside the courtroom? What was the reaction to all of this?
It was obviously celebratory on the Metcalf side and detrimental on the Anthony side. And, since the guilty verdict came down earlier today, he immediately broke down in tears. You saw the tears running down his face. And then, he was reprimanded to the state. He walked out of the room and for a few minutes, and then he came back before that punishment phase started. And Vinny, when he came back in, his face just looked bewildered. It was kind of I don't mean to make it a weird face, but it was just a shock. So like his eyes were wide, mouth just gaping open, as if, now it's really settled in because, he's been out on bond this whole time. So obviously it's a very real situation, but for the last year and some change, you've been at home. You haven't been behind those bars like some of the defendants we see in cases that we cover here at Court TV. But now he's never going to, well, he might, when he gets out or, with the parole and everything, but it's going to be a while before he gets to walk into a residential area again that's not in the confines of the correctional system.
Yeah, and it's basically, whatever amount that he's lived his life to this point, it's almost like that lifetime until he's eligible for parole, which again, it's all relative, right? Like we see murderers that have no chance for parole. We see murderers that get sentenced to 50 years, 60 years. And here could have been a life sentence, which would max at 60 years, but still, the jury showed some level of compassion here. What about, in the moment, in this day that happened, right? You never know what a jury's going to say. You keep saying that he seems so shocked. It almost tells me like he wasn't prepared for this. Like his attorneys didn't prepare him for the possibility that stabbing someone in the heart could result in a guilty verdict. I don't understand how he wasn't prepared. And it seemed like the defense didn't do much in the penalty phase either.
That's how it was. And, Vinny, maybe it's because he saw all the support that he got nationally. I mean, remember, there was almost $600,000 raised. And, of course, he's had tons of supporters outside this courthouse. I'm sure, being at home on bond, he's seen a lot of that support. So maybe he thought that a lot of, this country was on his side. And, there were people on his side, obviously, but not, on this jury that decided that, he was a murderer. There was the manslaughter charge. The jury had an out if they didn't want to commit him on the murder, but they decided that this was very intentional. That was the word that the prosecution kept harping on, was intentionality. And so again, to your point as well, the defense only put on 6 witnesses. They ended abruptly. They rested, out of nowhere almost yesterday. We're sitting in the courtroom after 3 witnesses yesterday. We go on this long, elongated break. We've only had 40 minutes for lunch throughout, last Thursday, Friday, Saturday. They had a Saturday session. And then we had an hour and 15-minute break, right? And then we come back, and this judge, again, has been very prompt, on time. He's laying down the law about the rules in his courtroom. So we get back at 12:30. All right, 12:45 rolls around. 1 o'clock rolls around, and we're like, okay, what's going on? 1 hour and 45 minutes later is finally when we go back in the courtroom. So, of course, in that period of time, there's speculation and thoughts running. Are they trying to broker a last-minute plea deal? Are they prepping him to testify? What could it be? And then we get back in there, and it's just the defense rests. And we're like, oh, okay, only 6 witnesses to the prosecution's 21. A couple of, student witnesses that were there that didn't really offer as much as I would imagine they would. We had a cop up there that pretty much said that, carrying a blade under 5.5 inches was not criminally illegal, but maybe it was against school policy. That's all they got out of him. So it was kind of a shock to everyone in the courtroom that it just ended that quickly.
So another thing, Cody, we've been seeing, and we've seen some of it, what's been happening outside of the courthouse and the tensions out there. And obviously, as you mentioned, there were supporters for the defendant. There were people who believed it was self-defense. They believe he was the victim. Jury did not agree. How has that turned out? Because we've seen the immediate reaction, and where we initially looked, it didn't seem like things got necessarily out of control. Any reports of any of that happening at the courthouse?
Well, Vinny, I can tell you there's been no violence per se, but there have been several verbal confrontations. Of course, I've been inside the courtroom for the majority of the days for the past few days, but I've seen the pictures. And even when I've come out here, people will mouth off at either me or other forms of media. And then you have the opposing sides kind of yelling back and forth at each other. But one thing, especially today, they've had plenty of security outside, making sure, people have their First Amendment right to voice their opinion about everything. There's judgment, there's differing opinions and all that, but everything's been kind of tame as far as physical altercations. Now, that's not to say there's been some profanity thrown around like, any other situation, any divisive situation. And even as I'm sitting here now, I'm looking over and there's a crowd of maybe 100 or so people, on a speaker talking about, of course, what just came down, this 35-year sentencing for the defendant here, Karmelo Anthony. So there have been high tensions, Vinny. The tension you can cut it with the knife when you're out here, but no real violence, which, thankfully so.
To me, the most surprising part of everything is that it was a self-defense case and the defendant didn't testify. Yeah. And obviously there were other witnesses there who saw what happened, and you don't have to testify. Sometimes if there's just two people there and one's dead, you have to testify to tell the story. But in a circumstance like this, because we've covered other cases involving high school kids, and we've seen high school kids testify and relive and explain to the jury what was going through their mind at the time. How did the defense attempt to get that to the jury if Karmelo Anthony did not deliver that message during the trial, didn't deliver that message during the punishment phase when he was being sentenced? Like, they never really heard his story from his lips.
And Vinny, that's, the big question here. Of course, there's huge risk with testifying, obviously so. But even in, presenting their case, the only time you ever really heard about who Karmelo Anthony was as the person was through their first witness, who was his track coach, who talked about him being, captain of the football team in the year 2024. And that award was, voted on by the players, not just the coaches, not just by seniority, just because you're an older kid. They said that, he was looked at upon as a natural born leader. And then Vinny, the only other time they touched on it was in opening statements when they talked about, well, Karmelo was a brother. Karmelo was a son. He was a nephew. He had a 3.7 GPA while holding down 2 jobs in high school. But that's the only time we ever really heard any humanization of this man here. We didn't hear, the thing that I'd imagine the jury wanted to hear from him if he testified was what was really going through your mind. That's the whole thing when you're claiming self-defense. We have to understand why you felt the need to use that sort of force to save your life. That's the whole point of a self-defense claim. You feared for your life. Tell us what was going through your mind. Tell us your account, what was happening, to make us feel for you, to make the jury feel for you. But the jury did not get that. And the defense did not really put that on in their case as well, only with these 6 witnesses. It was very minuscule throughout the grand scheme of this trial, where it seemed as if the prosecution was just stepping on the necks of everything the defense was trying to roll out.
And at the end of the day, you're admitting that, yeah, it was my knife, my hand, I stabbed him, I'm the one who killed him. So you're trying to justify it, and you're expecting 12 people to set you free after stabbing someone in the heart who did not have a weapon, without telling them why you did it and what your perspective was. And I thought it was a huge missed opportunity if in fact they thought that this could happen. I don't understand how you could even conceive of being set free if you don't tell your story under these circumstances.
And Benny, something else,
getting
I don't mean to
tripped
cut you
up
off.
Go ahead.
I don't mean to cut you off, but something else they didn't address, Benny, is that why did he have the knife? They gave no reason as to why the knife was there on school grounds. They didn't talk about, they could have said he liked to camp. They could have said, you know, when you're setting a tent up, they have to cut nylon. They didn't present any reasoning as to why this knife was there on school grounds in his possession, which, to your point, another missed opportunity as I sat there in that courtroom as well.
Yeah, and what we've seen in successful self-defense cases is the defendant taking the jury to that moment so they understand what they were feeling, what they were seeing, what their perception was, and then the jury has to decide if it's reasonable or not. But like, there was a reason why he stabbed him, and it's either because he wanted to murder him or he felt threatened. Like, those are the two choices. And prosecutors put in their evidence, and it seemed like the defense just didn't. And it was so obvious what needed to be done. Unless at the end of the day, and this is always possible, right, that he wasn't in fear, that he was there to start a fight, right? And if that's the case, then you can't put him up there because he's not going to be a good liar. He's not, you know what I mean? So if you know that in your heart of hearts, that he was guilty and his intent was to pick a fight and was to instigate something, then that would be a reason for him not to testify. Now, jury can't consider that in getting to their verdict. I'm talking about the process of deciding whether or not to put him up there. And wow, I'm shocked because a 17, well, he's 19 now, but a 19-year-old, likely, no matter how mature you are, you're going to be guided by the lawyers. Like, adults are guided by the lawyers on whether or not they should testify. A 19-year-old is going to listen to what they have to say, I would think. So it's really, while it's his decision, it's really the lawyer's decision.
Absolutely. And, you know, of course, with all of these cases that we follow and cover here, Benny, there's huge risk that comes with getting up there, subjecting yourself to cross-examination. I mean, he can get up there under direct by his defense attorneys. We can hear all, you know, the love and support and how he was a great kid, which no one's saying that he wasn't. You know, that's him as a character. I'm sure they could have called some character witnesses. But the thing about it, Benny, this prosecutor was on top of it with every single aspect of this case. Through his direct of the witnesses they called during the prosecution's case, and through cross-examination through the few witnesses of the defense's case. Because when the defense is trying to establish, you know, we've heard a lot about the tent culture, how the tents are like locker rooms and you wouldn't be in the opposing locker room and all that. The defense came up there with a coach from Karmelo School who kind of negated that whole aspect, saying that track and field was very social. People walked around and, you know, hung out under tents and everything else. They had a student come up there, you know, attest to the same thing, that even me and Karmelo were under the memorial tent at some point in time. The prosecution, as soon as they get on cross-examination, asked a collection of 6 or 7 questions. Were you surprised that a knife was at the event? I was, because knives aren't really supposed to be at a school event. You're right. You would say that's against school policy. Absolutely. Were you surprised that one of your students is one, you know, the culprit here in this stabbing? Yes. I'm sure you feel bad that one of your students is the one that stabbed somebody. You know, these simplistic questions for the jury to digest. So, you know, as I'm sitting there, as we're establishing, or as the defense is establishing, you know, who Karmelo Anthony is as the human in their attempt to try to, the prosecution is pretty much saying, while all that may be true, we're still talking about Austin Metcalf that is stabbed to death.
Right. But it was a self-defense case. And in the self-defense case, at the end of the day, the expectation of being found not guilty and the expectation of walking out of the courtroom without telling the jury in your own words why you killed Austin, to me, it was unrealistic. And I don't understand why. And maybe at some point we'll find out why that decision was made. But to me, it doesn't make sense. All right, Cody, before we run out of time here, I just want to have just a couple of final thoughts from you, because you were there, you were in the courtroom, you experienced the families, you experienced what's happening outside. As you walk away from this case, what are the things that are going to kind of stick with you? Because when I was a correspondent out in the field, or even when I still go out as an anchor like you are right now, there's always like certain moments or things that come instantly to mind when I think about all these cases. For this one, what's going to come into your mind when you think back about the case of Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony?
The one thing I can't get out of my head, Benny, think we talked about it on a previous segment here, is one of the coaches who was called under the prosecution's case, the one that was a 14-year combat veteran in Iraq who has seen death. And just to keep it in a nutshell, I don't have to tell the full story again, but essentially he's heard the last dying breaths of people before since he's seen combat. And you know, he described those breaths as different from gasps of air. They sound different. It's what we've heard as described as the death rattle. And he said as he's doing compressions, he noticed Austin stop breathing. And there's another coach that's on the phone with 911 saying, oh, he's unconscious. His eyes are rolling back. He's stopping to breathe. And then the coach that was testifying said he heard that death rattle come back up. Your brain's last attempt to get some air to it before eventually dying. And while he heard that, the coach that was calling 911, we heard all this on audio on the 911 call played in court. That coach that was calling was like, oh, he's breathing again. He's breathing again. But the coach that was doing the chest compression said he knew that was it. But he didn't say anything to the surrounding coaches and people around who were praying and everything because he didn't want to ruin the hope that they had. But in his mind, he knew it was done right there. But he kept on going. You heard him in the 911 call. Come on, Austin, stay with me, Austin. All of that emotional, just the mental weight of it. And then while he's telling that story, we hear the 911 call, and then the Metcalf family, just crying their eyes out. You got grown men over here crying their eyes out. And then you look across at Karmelo Anthony's family, and they're, his parents are, consoling each other as well, because these are, at that point in time, accusations against their child. That, there was no conviction yet, but they're hearing these egregious, accusations against their son, who hadn't done anything like this before, hadn't stabbed anyone. And so I can imagine they're sitting there trying to wrap their mind around, not my son. This couldn't have been Karmelo. But the camera's playing, just the emotional toll of it, Vinny, on both sides. You know what I mean? That's what I'm taking away from this one. But that witness there that described that death rattle and not wanting to kill the hope, even though we knew he was dead, that was heavy.
Yeah. And that's the reality of this incredibly sad case out of Texas. Cody Thomas, great reporting. We didn't have cameras. We didn't have microphones, but thank goodness we had Cody inside the courtroom. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, Benny. Thanks for having me.
A verdict is in the case against Karmelo Anthony in McKinney, Texas. Collin County is the scene. This is the outside of the Collin County courthouse. Inside the courtroom, the parties have gathered, and our Cody Thomas is in place. We're just awaiting the judge to take the bench. He says that Karmelo Anthony is there. This is the first appearance of Hunter Metcalf. This is the twin brother. He was not called as a witness, but he is now in the courtroom. He hasn't been in the courtroom for any of the trial. This is his first appearance inside that courtroom, and Cody continues to pass along messages saying the courtroom is filling up steadily. Of course, security is very high. Both sets of parents are in the courtroom, Karmelo Anthony's parents, and of course the Metcalfs as well in the courtroom, along with their son, the surviving twin, Hunter Metcalf. Outside the courthouse, of course, it's been chaotic over the course of the trial on some level, but we're seeing it bubble up now as news spreads that there is a verdict in this case. Karmelo Anthony admits that he stabbed Austin Metcalf at a track meet last year after the two got into a verbal confrontation underneath a high school tent during a rain event. Both sides have different opinions on what transpired next. The defense here is that Karmelo warned the Metcalf brothers, specifically Austin, that he had something in his bag and he better not touch him or else. When Austin Metcalf then pushed Karmelo Anthony, he did reach in, grabbed a 4-inch pocket knife, and stabbed the young 17-year-old to death. Along with us, Michael Jafer and Sonny Slaughter. We've all watched this trial play out through the eyes of Cody Thomas. And again, if I cut you off, it's because we're getting some transmissions from Cody. But Sonny, to you first here as we await this verdict. There are 3 basic scenarios. You've got guilty of murder, the top charge, which carries with it a potential life sentence. Next is manslaughter, put on the table today through the defense. The judge granted that. And then, of course, the third option, not guilty. How important is it for that jury and for the defense to have manslaughter on the verdict form?
I think it's really important because I do not feel like Karmelo Anthony had the initial intent or the intent to murder. I think it was reactionary. I think all of them should have calmed down. They didn't. And I just think, I don't think it was an intentional homicide, but I don't see this as a not guilty verdict at all because someone is dead, Austin is deceased, and that is a criminal act. So manslaughter is the best that they can hope for, and with a lower sentencing, but I do not see Karmelo walking out of court today as a free young man.
Michael, do you agree that's a long shot?
I disagree with Sonny on this one. I think that there's a good chance he's going to be acquitted because here's why. There was only one testimony that I've seen is that he stabbed him one time. He didn't stab him multiple times. I do agree that he shouldn't have done it, and I do agree that it was maybe disproportionate. But there's a good chance that this jury is going to come back not guilty because they came back so. If this deliberation was 3 days, 4 days, I think I would tend to agree that probably they'll come back with manslaughter. But coming back in 3 hours, man, I can't imagine them coming back in 3 hours and finding him guilty. I feel like they're going to come back and find him not guilty. It's just I question the 3 hours. I just question that. So I think there's a good chance of that. But look, could it be that they came back in 3 hours with manslaughter and manslaughter was
got to
the
cut you off. They are back on the record, according to our Cody Thomas inside the courtroom. The jury is heading into the courtroom. Karmelo is looking very serious but expressionless. Defense attorney has his arm around him. The tension is clearly high in here, not verbal, but you can feel it. That is our Cody Thomas sending notes to us because, again, if you're just joining us, there are no cameras allowed in this case, but it has been watched by people across the country, and specifically for those living in the Collin County, Texas area. So we'll wait with bated breath until Cody types again, but the scene has been set. The jury has been called for. We do know what comes next. Guilty of murder. This is Cody Thomas. The verdict is guilty. Guilty of murder, the top charge against Karmelo Anthony.
Wow.
So,
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, wow. Indeed. We'll watch the crowd outside. They will start to get this information momentarily. And if we could keep that camera up on the outside there, because it'll just be a matter of seconds before this crowd reacts.
Wow.
There's a live look outside the courthouse as people have gathered. Again, if you're just joining us, Karmelo Anthony has been found guilty of murder, the top charge in this case after just 3 hours of deliberation. Sonny, besides wow, which a lot of us are feeling, thoughts?
I was not expecting the top charge. I really was thinking that they would see manslaughter, still guilty, but manslaughter, different sentencing, but guilty of murder. So, that's heavy.
Wow.
And I hope everyone just does not seem like everyone's going to be calm. It seems like we're going to have a problem there.
Wow. This is dumb.
You can see the...
this is dumb.
What is dumb, Michael?
I'm sorry, Ted. This is just dumb. This is stupid. I can't believe that this jury came back in 3 hours with guilty. I'm totally stunned. On top of that, this judge as well, not letting cameras in the courtroom. I mean, good job. Good job, Your Honor. Really, really, really good job. You handled it really, really well. You have this community that's about to get lit on fire. You don't allow cameras to go into a courtroom. The community already believes that this kid is being railroaded. And then look at what happened. Your jury came back within 3 hours for a guilty guilty verdict for a kid who used a 4-inch knife one time, didn't use it multiple times. Was it wrong? Yes. But was it murder, like, beyond a reasonable doubt? No. And was it murder beyond a reasonable doubt within 3 hours? Absolutely not. This is insane. This is dumb.
Cody Thomas saying that there are tears on Karmelo's side of the courtroom, and they're going into the penalty phase immediately. So this, no one is leaving the courtroom. They're going to now go into the penalty phase. There's a huge, Karmelo Anthony is a young man. He is now 19. And the sentencing for the top charge, in a lot of states, you're found guilty of murder, you're going away, sometimes for life without, or at least 25 to life before you're eligible. Texas is different. The range of sentencing here is 5 years to life in prison. So the decision making now, and we'll wait till Cody updates us whether the jury is going to stay and do the sentencing or if it'll be the judge. Boy, Michael, if I'm the defense, I'm getting that jury as far away from this courthouse as possible.
Yeah, 100%, 1,000%. I'm not letting this jury touch. I mean, I'm questioning the jury. I'm asking them, how did you reach your verdict? How did you reach it so quickly? What happened? It was a 4-inch knife. He used it one time. He was pushed. I'm not saying that it was right, but what are you doing? How did you get this verdict? I'd want to know. My whole identity as a defense attorney would be in question, right? I'm questioning my identity right now, and I have nothing to do with this case. How could you come back like that? I would be enraged. I'm enraged right now. This is very upsetting. And then on top of it, to compound it, this dumb judge didn't allow cameras in the courtroom. What was your wisdom? What were you thinking? How you put on a robe? Are you that much of an imbecile that you won't let cameras in the courtroom in a case like this? This is not a rape case. This is something different. This is something that's clearly the whole community is enraged. And you knew that before the trial started. So, I mean, this is very upsetting.
You can see the reaction. The crowd outside, of course, has received the news that Karmelo Anthony has been found guilty of the top charge of murder. And now inside the courtroom, they are moving to the penalty phase. At this point, you do wish that the people that were supporting Austin Metcalf would just leave. To be honest, the jury has come back with guilty. There is no need for Mr. Stars and Stripes to be standing there with his moronic, intimidating, stand-your-ground-ish, cliche look to continue to incite. You won. Move on. Get out. Also joining us, Judge Kimberly Bando. It's been a while, Kimberly. It's nice to see you. Your reaction here.
If I'm the defense attorney, I'm already preparing my appellate brief. I want to poll the jury. I want to know one by one, is this your verdict? I already have my Batson challenge, enumeration error in my appellate brief. I'm already I'm pivoting right now. And I'm also trying to get some mitigation witnesses ready. He's a good kid, Judge. This was a mistake. We're remorseful. He admitted it as soon as the police stopped him. You have to pivot as a defense attorney and move on to the next phase. The verdict is in.
Cody Thomas saying that there's lots of crying in the courtroom as everybody absorbs this on Karmelo's side. Also, on the Metcalf side, tears. And again, they're going straight into the penalty phase. And Judge Bando, the jury makeup. There was a Batson challenge launched after the state used their strikes to get rid of the only 3 African Americans that were potential jurors. And they said this was because they worked for the school district, or a school district, and that's the reason they cut them out. Looking forward, is that reason enough in your estimation?
It may not be reason enough, but it's a substantial possible enumeration of error that I would definitely raise. That would be number one. That initially on the forefront of this, that my client was not afforded a jury of his peers. The state arbitrarily struck them as jurors based on their race, and not because you can be an educator and be reasonable. That doesn't automatically eliminate you from being a juror on this panel. Teachers punish, discipline, rehabilitate, and actually would be better jurors because they're used to dealing with these scenarios with children fighting, having difficulties. And that's exactly who you would want on the jury. And I would definitely argue that in my appellate brief.
Yeah, Sonny, I hear you chiming in as well.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Judge. I was thinking manslaughter. I didn't think they would come back with not guilty. Manslaughter, because this was a crime. But so, since we are here, I am thinking that no matter who makes the call, I'm looking at, they're going to say 25 plus. I can't imagine, based on what we're seeing now, this, I would like for everyone at the scene to just, it's better if they just move away, back up, because anything other, any riots or anything, that is just going to be problematic. I think this judge really did the most damage to this case by not allowing cameras in the courtroom.
Yes.
It allowed social media
Yes.
to fester, to foster.
Yes.
It allowed the hate to grow. It allowed the lies and the misinformation.
Yeah, we're gonna get a break. Cody just said that they are going to be going into sentencing and that the jury will be deciding punishment. And it looks like they're preparing some witnesses to call. So a short break inside the courtroom, outside the courthouse. This is the scene as people react to the guilty verdict against Karmelo Anthony.
No cameras, but we have our eyes and ears inside of the courtroom. Cody Thomas joins us now live outside of the courthouse in McKinney, Texas. Cody, good to see you. Tell me about those opening statements. First of all, what was it like being inside of the courthouse for those?
Well, yeah, Julia, as we know this judge is really laying down the law inside that courtroom, being very strict on how people go to and from the courtroom and about, us as media using electronics. He even admonished members of the gallery for whispering to each other, saying if he caught somebody whispering again, I didn't see anybody whispering, but, he just said if he saw that again, they'd keep them out. He kicked them out permanently. But, Julia, to touch on those opening statements, of course, the prosecution is continuing the narrative that we've heard from the beginning since April of 2025 that Karmelo Anthony was under that tent for no good reason. He was just there, and then Austin Metcalf and his friends came up to approach him to say, get out from under the tent, to which Karmelo Anthony, the prosecution says, got aggressive, reached in that bag, pulled out a knife, and stabbed Austin Metcalf. But the defense in their opening statements painted a different picture. They began by humanizing Karmelo Anthony, talking about how he had 2 jobs in high school, how he was, a brother, a son, an oldest brother, how he was a 3.7 GPA A student in school, just really painting him out to be a good human being before diving into their version of the facts of the case. Now, of course, we've heard that statement from eyewitnesses, or a witness on the stand, or not on the stand, in the area, saying that Karmelo reached into the bag saying, touch me if you want to, or see what happens if you touch me. And that's what led, when Austin pushed him, he stabbed him in the chest. But the defense attorney says it was more of a, as long as you don't touch me, we'll be cool, implying that, everything's fine. I understand there's a verbal altercation going on here, but just don't put your hands on me. So that was the narrative the defense painted there. They also said that Karmelo was under the tent because he was seeing somebody he was familiar with, a friend of his still girlfriend now, somebody he'd been acquainted with, somebody he recognized. And then they walked through some of that video, Julia, showing that Karmelo Anthony was under the tent for about 2 minutes before Metcalf, his twin brother, and their friends got to the tent, and the whole ordeal went down in about 4.5 minutes of both of them, both parties being under that tent, Julia. But again, emotional out here. I'm looking around it here. There's a lot more demonstrators than there were yesterday during jury selection. So, each side is here. It's a polarizing case, of course, that has caught many headlines across this country, but those opening statements were definitely powerful on either side.
Notes, Cody. We're so fortunate that you've been able to share with us what is happening inside of that courtroom. Tell us more about the surveillance video, because your notes on this were very interesting. What were you able to see? And then I also understand there was a reaction from the victim's family when that was being played.
Yeah, Julia. So that's in the opening statement. They were referencing surveillance video, and of course, everyone wanted to see video. We haven't seen anything. There's been a gag order on this case since the very beginning last year. So they start playing this video. There were 5 different angles of the video getting walked through from testimony by the forensic video analyst. And they were very wide-angle videos, Julia, and the witness had to talk about how he had to use this software to zoom in and try to make the video as clear as possible. And even then, Julia, I won't lie, it still looked very fuzzy and hazy. It definitely sets the scene. You can see what's going on, but even the prosecution distinctly said that you won't be able to uniquely identify anyone, but they referred to Karmelo on the video as the person of interest, and they referred to Austin Metcalf as the victim. Of course, as the forensic analyst has digested this video and dissected it and pointed out everything that we need to know, going through shoes and the type of clothing they were wearing. So we identified who each person was in the video, even though they kind of just looked like humanoid blobs. But you see, one thing that stood out to me, Julie, is that, I'm very familiar with track meets. I was under the impression that, when you go to a championship track meet, you have multiple tents on the same side of the bleachers. But in this video, because it's early in the morning, just before 10 a.m. when all this happened, the high school where all this went down, Memorial High School, it was just an isolated tent in the bleachers by itself. There were no surrounding, schools or anything in the general area. You saw some schools walking in, but I guess, the meet was just starting. But anyway, they identified Karmelo walking up the bleachers, kind of walking towards the tent. He kind of goes towards someone, and you see him standing there for a couple of minutes. Then you see Austin Metcalf, his twin brother, and his friends walking up and getting under the tent. And then once everything's happening under the tent, it just kind of looks like a blob of people. You can't really make out anything that's really going on for 5 to 6 minutes. And then you see a quick to and from. And they were implying that was like the push, the initial contact. You can't really see anything happening. Before then, you see people walking by. They're not really, turning heads as if something's loud and, something's catching their attention. But all of a sudden, you see that to and from, and then you see Karmelo, or who they identify as person of interest, who we're assuming to be Karmelo Anthony. He runs out from under the tent, and then he's running down the bleachers, sprinting a ways away from the tent and out of the stadium onto the track and everything towards one of his coaches. And eventually after that, we see another angle of the video where Karmelo's been taken into custody by police. But the reaction, Julia, it wasn't a visceral reaction. When you saw the to and from, of course, that's the stabbing action, if you will. All I saw, I'm sitting 2 rows behind Austin Metcalf's father, and his head was just kind of in his hands, kind of like this. Wasn't necessarily crying, but, just implying that he doesn't really want to see, even though you can't see the stabbing, but he knows in his mind this is the moment that his son lost his life. So he was just there, obviously overwhelmed by everything. I'm sitting right behind the Metcalf family. Karmelo Anthony's family is on the opposite side of the courtroom. But again, the video, not as impactful as I thought, but it definitely is a scene setter to help us understand clearer as to what's going on, since we haven't seen anything so far in this case.
Oh, incredible detail, Cody. You're setting the scene for us. Not being able to see what's going on in this case that has so many eyes on it is really helpful. You also broke some news for us earlier when it came to the jury. There have been a lot of questions about who's on this jury, what may be their demographics, how will that impact a case that has had a lot of polarization racially, especially online, even though we know these parties say, even the prosecution today in the opening saying this is not about race. But what have you observed about the racial makeup of this jury?
Yeah, Julia, so of course, this, with the optics of this case, this story here, young black kid, young white kid, violent crime. Of course, people are going to have their opinions. They're going to have their judgments. And, the jury was, that the makeup of the jury was in question. And so, of course, I was in jury selection yesterday, and that jury was seated around just after 5 p.m. yesterday. And I couldn't necessarily see the courtroom today. We saw reports last night that there was no African-American people on the jury, and that held to be true. It's a majority white jury, of course, made up of men and women. There are 3 Asian women on the jury. One looked, what looked to be a Middle Eastern woman on the jury, and another person of darker complexion on the jury, but none of them were African-American. There's a total of 12 jurors, 6 alternates, so a total of 18, I guess I should say. But yeah, majority white jury, all the men are white as well. So the reports were true, no African-American people on this jury. I remember yesterday during jury selection, the defense raised an objection to the prosecution's strikes. In the strike zone, there were 3 black female jurors that the prosecution wanted to strike, and that would have been all the African-American jurors that were available at the time. And the prosecution says they did not strike them on a racial basis, but on an occupational basis, because they were all educators, and they thought that would hold some sort of bias because all of this went down at a school. But the defense's objection was eventually denied by the judge, and the judge, granted the strikes on behalf of the prosecution. So those are the only three available African-American jurors at the time, right before the jury got seated. That objection got denied about 15 minutes before it was seated yesterday. So majority white jury, 3 Asian women and 2 women of color, but no African-Americans at all.
And the judge saying that there were race-neutral reasons for the strikes of the African-Americans in that pool. Cody Thomas, thank you for all of those details. I know you got to get back inside of that courtroom and grab some lunch before you get back. So we will see you later on. There's no escaping how polarizing this trial is. Both Karmelo's mother and Austin Metcalf's father have spoken about the emotional toll here. And joining me now is someone who knows really better than anyone about a trial being this polarizing. He's an attorney who successfully defended George Zimmerman, who was accused of murdering Trayvon Martin. And that was a case that had issues of race and self-defense. It defined that trial as well. We have with us Mark O'Mara. Mark, it is so good to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me. I think you're an important voice here because whether you see it this way or not, there are many people online, people who are reacting to this case, and it often seems this way whenever we have a case where 2 different parties are of different races. You have a self-defense allegation and one is unarmed, the victim. There's often a reference to the Trayvon Martin case, the George Zimmerman case. Sure. I want to ask your opinion. Do you see similarities here in this case?
Oh, no, there definitely are. It is undeniable, and we can't and really shouldn't even deny the harsh reality that race interposes itself on most criminal trials. It imposes itself on the criminal justice system as a whole. And it does so here in this case, only because they are of different races. Now, I'm not saying that Karmelo had any racial intent in his actions, but we as the observers, right, as the viewers of it, look at this and say, oh, obviously there's a racial component. There may have been nothing in either one of their minds the day that this happened, this tragedy occurred. But we look at it as lawyers and as commentators and say we have to be aware of it because we know, and I've argued for decades, that there's an undeniable bias existing in the criminal justice system against young black males. Used to be we could never even talk about it 20 years ago or so. Finally, we can talk about that undeniable bias, but it's there. And I would tell you, I'm very concerned that there is not an African American on this panel, and more concerned that the state was able to cross out 3 African American females that were opposed on what we do call a Batson strike because of a concern of a racial striking. And that's a problem for this trial, and we haven't even started yet.
Yeah, that's been concerning to a lot of people who are reacting to this. I'm curious what the breakdown was in that landmark trial that you successfully represented George Zimmerman, if you remember. Was it similar? There are other cases. The Ahmaud Arbery one stands out to me where there was a question of that jury. There was only one African American on that one down in Brunswick, Georgia. What do you think that has, if it has an impact at all on how the outcome may be in this case, and will they have a successful appeal if there's a conviction?
Well, again, my jury was 6 women, only one who was identified as maybe biracial, but no African Americans on my jury. I am very concerned, as I mentioned a moment ago, about the fact that we now go into this trial with a racial component not only existing as it did before jury selection, but now I think exaggerated or exacerbated because now 12 non-African Americans are going to decide this kid's fate. And just as we had to deal with in the Zimmerman case, you want to have something that people can place their trust in the verdict, whatever it is. And I was sort of hopeful in the Zimmerman case that since all the evidence came out, all the arguments came out, that it would at least be understood, but it was still difficult to trust. When you go into a case like this with the undeniable racial concern and do it with a jury that has no African Americans, not only do you build in a possible appellate issue, but you really build in a social issue that how is the black community going to look at this if he gets convicted and say this is a just verdict? They're going to look at it the way they've had to for decades, which is it's a biased system. Here's an example of it.
Oh, wow. Really great insight, Mark.
In wake of this tragic incident, our family has been under attack. Whatever you think what happened between Karmelo and the Metcalf boys, my 3 younger children, my husband, and I didn't do anything to deserve to be threatened, harassed, and lied about.
That is the mother of Karmelo Anthony speaking out and talking about what's happening to her family after her son allegedly stabbed another student to death. The case has now gone to the next level. The grand jury heard evidence, and now the district attorney is speaking out. Let's take a listen to the district attorney and then the response of Karmelo Anthony's attorney.
Good afternoon. Earlier this spring, our community was shaken by what happened at a school track meet in Frisco. The violent loss of 17-year-old Austin Metcalf. For weeks now, my team has been presenting evidence to the grand jury, and today I summarized that evidence, and I asked the grand jury to return a first-degree murder indictment against Karmelo Anthony, which they did. With this indictment, the case now moves formally into the court system. From this point forward, we'll continue doing our job both fully and fairly to pursue justice under the law. As for the scheduling of the trial, that will be up to the court. But when the time comes, we will be ready. Now, we know that this case has struck a deep nerve here in Collin County and beyond. And that's understandable. When something like this happens at a school event, it shakes people to the core. But let's remember that the justice system works best when it moves with steadiness and principle. That's what we're committed to, and that's what this case deserves. We're also mindful of Austin's family and everyone who loved him. Please keep them in your thoughts, and if you're willing, your prayers as well. Finally, let's remember that a defendant is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty in a court of law.
An indictment simply means that a grand jury, after hearing only the prosecution's side of the story, determined that there was enough evidence to allow the case to move forward to court. That's all an indictment means. Karmelo and his family are confident in the justice system and the people of Collin County to be fair and impartial. Of course, Karmelo looks forward to his day in court. It's only in a trial that a jury will hear the full story, one that includes critical facts and context that the grand jury simply didn't get to hear. It's only in a trial that both sides get to present evidence and cross-examine each other's witnesses. This is why our justice system is based on the principle of a full and fair trial. That's because it's only in a trial that the full story can be heard and that impartial justice can be done. We expect that when the full story is heard, the prosecution will not be able to rule out the reasonable doubt that Karmelo Anthony may have acted in self-defense. Self-defense is a fundamental right guaranteed every American. The law is clear. When self-defense is raised by the facts, the law puts the burden squarely on the prosecution to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the citizen accused did not act in self-defense. The law does not expect or require the citizen accused to prove that they acted in self-defense. It's actually the opposite. The law requires the prosecution to rule out the reasonable doubt that the citizen accused may have acted in self-defense. We understand that this case has sparked strong reactions. Please remember that there are real human beings, kids, on both sides of this case. We ask that everyone do as the law requires and withhold judgment until all the evidence can be heard in court. We are confident that when all the facts are presented and the full story is heard, the jury will reach the right conclusion and justice will be done.
All right, let's bring back in our think tank here in studio. Al Wunsch III, Matthew Mangino, Josh Schiffer. So, self-defense, right? It sounds to me, and the reaction of the public as well, this has struck a nerve. This is reminding me of the Kyle Rittenhouse case out of Kenosha, Wisconsin. Was also a self-defense case, was also a case where a bunch of people came to the support of the accused murderer, and was raising money as well. What are your thoughts about how this is going to play out?
It's a track meet. We're at that point in our society where you could go to in a track meet, somebody is going to have self-defense and someone is going to be dead. I mean, this doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. It's a horrific thing. I think that the defense counsel made a big mistake putting what he did up on there. It was a ridiculous yawn, and then he doesn't say anything about a victim and the fact that there is a child who's dead. Okay, he goes right into a situation where he starts talking about the law, and that it's a self-defense thing. I would have gotten up there and just said, listen, I'll see you in court. That's when you're going to hear what we're going to do. To put up that, it was an absolute travesty, and it was a waste of time, and it was foolish.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. You know, it was a yawner on top of everything else. I mean, you couldn't even really listen along. You kind of lost you on the technical
Hopefully we didn't lose
aspects
any viewers.
Yeah.
Right?
But the thing is, it's certainly a tragedy. But again, we're in Texas, and Texas is a stand your ground state, and there's no duty to retreat in Texas. And you know, you can defend yourself if you reasonably believe that you're in imminent fear of bodily injury or serious bodily injury. But of course, there also has to be proportionality. I mean, you can't stab somebody who grabs you by the shirt or takes a swing at you necessarily. So it's going to be interesting to see how that develops. It's certainly different than the case we've talked about for the last couple of days on Court TV, the Valley case where you know, there's somebody stabbed and you're in Connecticut and you have a duty to retreat and you have all that sort of thing going on. It's a whole different story in Texas.
To me, this case, there's supposedly some video that may show something, maybe more than one video, but you've also got a bunch of witnesses. There's a bunch of athletes that are underneath this tent at the moment that this is happening. So if the grand juries come back and prosecutors are going with first-degree murder against the 17-year-old, does that tell you anything about the case?
Yeah, it tells me that the DA is hunting for trophies, and he's got one, and he can't not hunt for trophies. That's why they gave him that job. Go get the biggest, baddest trophies you can, even when it's a couple of teenagers surrounded by people and a questionable death. He went for first. But here's my real problem.
Well, but you're presuming some facts there, right? You're presuming that this was self-defense. It sounds like that they're surrounded.
Well, that's just listen. No, I didn't even say surrounded. I said that's what the defense is going to bring up, self-defense. And it's one of the three defenses. It wasn't me. I didn't do it, and he needed killing. This was a he needed killing. That's what's going to come out in the defense. But here's my real problem with those two statements. Totally inappropriate manipulation of a potential jury pool on both of them. And that's bad. It's just bad form. Second of all, Mr. Defense Attorney, love you, feel you, all that. Don't ever talk about the full story coming out in a trial. Trial's an exercise in hiding evidence from jurors.
It is. It absolutely
That's what
is.
trial is. And if anybody can talk about it, look at what we've watched the last 6 months.
Right. Yeah.
So what are we going to show a jury is what a trial is.
Exactly. So there's an update from the family of Karmelo Anthony. This has been another point of controversy and debate online. And I'll read this. This is from their Give, Send, Go page. Today we received the official news that our son is indicted. Your nephew, your friend, your neighbor. This is a moment we hope we would never face, yet one we've been preparing for. Your support has reminded us that we're not alone. Your love helped us stand in the face of heartbreak, threats, and misinformation. One that will demand everything from us emotionally, financially, and spiritually. Some may wonder what this fund is truly for. We want to clarify that. So there's a list. Safe relocation for our family after repeated threats and the public leaking of our address. Basic living expenses that we've had to uproot our lives. Transportation to and from court proceedings. Trauma-informed counseling, and for our entire family. Enhanced security measures, and critically retaining qualified legal counsel and a thorough, fair investigative team. This has been this is a new in the world we're in now. All these defendants, not all of them, but a lot of the high-profile defendants are raising lots of money. Karen Reed over $1 million, Luigi Mangione over $1 million. I don't know how much they've raised, but they're raising funds as well.
Yeah, and that scares me.
Why does that scare you?
Well, because you know what, you're putting stuff up here, and you're losing focus on the case. Oh, we need to be able to move. We need to be able to do this. We need to be able to do that. Woe is me. Okay, we have a victim. We have a dead child. We have a child who's got a first-degree charge against him. That's the principal focus. When you start bringing in, well, we need transportation. We need this. We need that. We need groceries. We need
And we
food.
need to break. We're out of time.
Thanks so much for being with us as we follow day 2 today. We understand that the court is breaking for their lunch. That happened a short time ago. That means our eyes and ears in the courtroom, Cody Thomas, he is going to be able at some point to be able to join us from outside of the courthouse. But he's been keeping us updated on everything that's unfolding in this camera-less trial. Let's go to the report that Cody logged for us on what he's been observing.
Good afternoon. Yeah, day 2 off to a emotional start this morning. We had a first responder as the first witness on the stand, 3 witnesses so far, first responder and 2 officers. The first responder was a firefighter and paramedic that pretty much testified to the severity of the wounds once he arrived to Austin Metcalf's body, and just talked about the intense life-saving efforts they went through trying to revive him, to which, of course, to no avail. But they talked about, attaching a machine to his chest to read a pulse, and he had no pulse. They said it was flatline. There was an acronym he used, a medical term, and the prosecutor asked for, simplicity for the lay people in the gallery, and he just said, yeah, he had no pulse. He was pretty much dead in a cardiac sense. They loaded him up into the back of the ambulance, to which, he eventually did not regain consciousness. But then we went on to see more from officers, and they were testifying about their response to the situation that day. One was a school resource officer. He was actually the one that made contact with Karmelo Anthony and the one who detained him. But he talked about the commotion when he ran out there to the scene, all the kids running to him saying, someone's been stabbed, and they pointed towards Karmelo's direction. And so you see on the body cam when he finally approaches Karmelo, and Karmelo seemed to cooperate. He was being very cooperative. He was being compliant. He didn't try to run away. But the key thing about this testimony here on the body cam, you hear Karmelo say to the officer, he put his hands on me, I told him not to. And when he says that phrase, he clearly he's crying hysterically. You can hear him sobbing in a very emotional state, but the prosecution's harping on that last half of that statement, the I told him not to part, because the prosecution says that's simply a lie. We know we've heard that phrasing, he told him not to put his hands on me, or put your hands on me and see what happens. That's the narrative that the prosecution's running with, and that eventually led Karmelo to stab Austin Metcalf. But there was another officer whose body cam was played during this officer's testimony, where you heard the officer say, we have the alleged suspect, and then you clearly hear Karmelo say out loud, I'm not alleged, I did it. So kind of damaging to the defense's case here. But then we just heard from an officer who arrived who did not partake in any life-saving efforts for Austin Metcalf's body, more of scene patrol, scene security is what he was saying, and evidence control. He was the one securing off the scene there, and he actually showed, or we saw pictures of the knife. It was a 5-inch blade. The first time the jury actually saw that knife in person, they did a demonstrative effort in front of this jury where they showed that the blade could be swung out really quick with just the stroke of a thumb. You could open it really quickly with one hand. But the impactful part of that testimony is that we saw the body cam from this officer, where you actually see Austin Metcalf's pretty much lifeless body, everyone trying to give him chest compressions, but you see the body on screen, and that obviously brought out a visceral, emotional reaction from the Metcalf family. Plenty of tears and sobbing and consoling. And I looked towards Karmelo Anthony's side, and it was pretty stoic. There was a pretty, a lack of emotion there, not necessarily in a negative sense, but just really take evidence here, all the facts of this case as the prosecution presents it thus far. That's the latest right now. I'll send it back to you.
Thanks to Cody Thomas for that report there in McKinney, Texas. Let's bring in our guests who are standing by to talk about this evidence, this new evidence that the jury has seen inside of that courtroom. We have with us trial attorneys Lateef Gray and Al Wunsch III. Thank you both for being here to talk about this case that has so many people talking online. They are paying attention to the details, even though we don't have cameras inside, but the details that are coming out, everyone has an opinion on them, and I'm glad I can get your legal expertise on these. Al, let me start with you. The jury seeing the knife for the first time today. How important is the weapon, the size of the weapon? Does it matter, especially when this is a knife that obviously was able to kill someone?
Well, I mean, it's always a key part of any prosecution case to have the weapon. So when you have the weapon there and you can show that, and it dispels any, false rumors that it was a stake or something that was used for the sporting event that was going on. This is a knife. This is a knife that is a dangerous knife. And this is a knife that should not have been at a sporting event for a high school team. Perfect. Right there.
Ray, weigh in as well about that knife. What did you think about hearing that it's a 5-inch blade, that it was folded out at the point that the officers were able to preserve it? Talk about that part of it and whether or not that makes a difference when it comes to this case being self-defense or murder.
Well, I think it does make a difference in the fact that you have a 5-inch switchblade. This is not what we would consider a utility knife, which a lot of people keep with them, that has a little blade, a bottle opener, things like that. So the big question is, what was this young man doing at this track event with this type of knife that it seems like he brought it maybe for his particular purpose? So that's the big question as to what he was doing with this type of knife, which is not what we usually see people walk around with on a daily basis.
Yeah, we keep hearing that question. Why did he have the knife? Now, there was something that came out today, Al, where on cross-examination, one of the witnesses did confirm that having the knife is not a crime, but they don't mean at the school, obviously, because there is a specific rule for that school ground. Can you help people understand the difference and whether or not those school regulations matter in a court of law, in a murder trial?
Well, I mean, it is something that no weapons are supposed to be brought into the schools. Schools have a zero tolerance of any type of, they have a zero tolerance for having a pretend gun. You can't even bring a water pistol in some instances if it looks like a real weapon. So that is a zero tolerance policy. Okay, having the possession of the knife is not a criminal offense in and of itself. That's correct, okay? But it's a school event. He's a student. He's there. He's got a knife, 5-inch switchblade, which, I mean, we all agree is not the type of thing you would need under any circumstances at a sporting event. And he used the knife. So, whether or not it's legal to have it, it doesn't matter. Okay, it shouldn't have been there, and it shouldn't have been used, and it shouldn't have taken the life of that, poor 17-year-old kid.
Oh, yeah. This question of whether or not you're allowed to have it and whether or not that matters in a criminal trial reminds me of a case that I was inside of the courtroom for in Florida against Curtis Reeves, who was a retired police officer at a movie theater. There were signs on the movie theater doors that said, this is a no weapon zone. He had his weapon. He fired it in self-defense. A jury did acquit him of murder and killed another man who only had popcorn in his hand. But it did come up inside of the courtroom as to whether or not he saw the signs, whether he knew he should have it, or as a retired officer, is he allowed to carry the gun all the time? Lateef, is that, in your opinion, going to be weighing on the minds of the jury about where should this knife have been? Where was it permitted to have been? Or again, does it matter at all because this knife was used in a way that killed someone?
Well, I will say
I'm
this.
sure that's something that...
All right, let me let Lateef weigh in, Al, and then I'll let you react to it.
All right.
I'm sure that's something that the jury will consider, but I think we all know law trumps policy. So if it's not against the law, like I said, it's something that the jury will consider, but I don't think that will carry the day for either side at the end of the day.
Al, what do you think? Law trumps policy?
Yeah, law does trump policy, except that, and let's keep this in mind. This isn't Florida. Okay, that was the most ridiculous verdict I've ever heard in my life that happened with regards to a guy who throws a couple of, assault and buttery, I called it, and he ends up losing his life in a movie theater. All right, this is Texas. I am confident that they're going to be a lot smarter jury, and they're going to be looking at it facts-wise as to what was going on, as opposed to some ridiculous verdict out of Florida.
Let's look at what the school resource officer on the stand today. This was, of course, a big moment. This is someone who would have arrived right after. And here are some of Cody Thomas's notes from inside watching that testimony. This witness, Eduardo Cortez, he was a school resource officer. He described the arrest of Karmelo Anthony. He said an adult pointed out the suspect and said, "That's the guy. I called him towards me. I patted him down. I had him raise his arms and ordered him to walk with me along that fence line. He obeyed me. He didn't try to run away. I turned on my body-worn camera, had him place his hands behind his back, and had him detained. The thing that most shocked me was that a student brought a knife to a track meet, and this witness agrees that that alone was unprecedented. Then on cross-examination, this witness agrees that Karmelo Anthony was emotional, said the knife is under 5 inches, actually, not prohibited, it's not illegal, not a crime. So that's what I was mentioning there, of this witness speaking about it that way. But that body camera footage, Lateef, it was played inside of the courtroom today. That is always really important for jurors to see as much as they can. And here, they get to see the body camera not of days later when police catch someone, but right after it happens, this school resource officer is on the scene.
Right, and the body-worn camera presumably captures some spontaneous statements, excited utterances made by Mr. Anthony in the moment of the event while it's still on his mind and heavy on his heart. So oftentimes these body-worn cameras, which capture the aftermath of the incident, are best evidence because they capture things that are said and things that are done before anybody has time to consult with an attorney and develop a defense to what the particular charges are.
Al, what do you think about the weight of that body camera? Because I do want to add some of the notes that we're getting from the courtroom that you can hear on it, a handful of crying students. One child yells out, "That's my best friend, that's my brother," while crying and trying to come at Karmelo Anthony, is our understanding of that moment. I mean, there's so much sobbing when it comes to these children and the trauma that they're going through, and you're also hearing that sobbing in the courtroom. And this is something that is very compelling evidence, I would think, for these jurors.
Absolutely, but you know what I didn't hear? They were trying to kill me. I was feared for my life. I had nothing I could do. I had to do this to be able to get out of there because they were going to take my life. They were going to kill me. They were going to beat me to a pulp. I didn't hear any of that. So the self-defense argument starts to kind of fade a little, because that's at the moment when he's confronted by this officer and has the chance to say, "Listen, I did this because I had to. If I didn't, I would not have been able to get out of that tent. They were trying to beat me up. They were trying to do something to me. They were trying to kill me." You don't hear that. So I think that's going to be very important with regards to the prosecution's case. And of course, you hear those other cries going in the background. I mean, that's just an emotional aspect of it. That just shows you just how horrific this crime is.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing. And I mean, I feel terrible for both individuals, honestly. I hate to see that this Mr. Anthony has ruined his life with this ridiculousness of bringing on a knife to a track meet and going into the opposite field, the opposing team's domain. And why?
It is the trial that the nation is talking about, a case which has divided the community. Austin Metcalf was a high school athlete at a track meet, sitting under the Memorial High School tent with his twin brother and teammates. Karmelo Anthony was a student athlete from a different high school who sat under the Memorial tent and was asked to leave. That's when things escalated. Witnesses say Karmelo refused to leave and told Austin, "Touch me and see what happens." Austin did touch Karmelo, and what happened next ended the life of one teen and has another teen on trial for first-degree murder. Witnesses say Austin stood up and put his hand on Karmelo's shoulder and either shoved him or touched him non-violently. Then Karmelo pulled a knife out of his bag and stabbed Austin. Austin died, and now Karmelo is on trial facing decades behind bars. And the question for the jury, was this a justified killing done in self-defense? This story is tragic, but only one teen had a weapon and only one teen survived. Is this a case of self-defense? We're going to break down the facts of the case with Cody Thomas at the courthouse and break down Texas law to see if this was a justified killing. I'm Vinny Politan. Let's investigate. There's been a lot of talk in this case about Karmelo Anthony confessing to the crime, that this is an open and shut case. But yes, Karmelo Anthony, yes, he did it. Yes, he admitted that he did it. But that's not what this case is about. This is not a confession case. The confession that everyone is pointing to is the fact that after he stabs Austin Metcalf, Karmelo Anthony says that he did it, that he stabbed him. That's not in question in front of this jury at this trial. That's not a question of fact. That's presumed for the most part here by both sides. Why? Because the defense is alleging self-defense. This isn't about somebody else did this. No, he did it. Karmelo Anthony did it. He stabbed Austin Metcalf. But the question is, did he do it in self-defense? So in order to figure all of that out, the key to this case is going to be for the jury to figure out what happened under the tent. What happened in the moments before Austin Metcalf is stabbed to death by Karmelo Anthony. That's what is significant here. The actual stabbing itself, both sides agree, because when you claim self-defense, you're saying, yeah, he did it. He did it. Okay, we get that. But he was justified in doing it. And to figure out whether or not he is justified, the jury has to understand and have a clear picture of what's going on under this tent at this track meet. The back and forth between Karmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf and perhaps other people underneath the tent. And the people that were there, the witnesses, they've been talking about this. They've been testifying about it. And the jury has to analyze their testimony, because we know eyewitness testimony, while sometimes it's somewhat consistent, always has variations. My goodness, 7 people see a car accident. You're going to have 7 different versions of what happened. There'll be differences, slight differences, and sometimes larger differences, all of which the defense is going to go after. So what happened under the tent is extremely important for this jury to figure out. And for us to analyze the case, we need to understand what happened in the moments leading up to Karmelo Anthony pulling the knife out of his bag. What took place prior to that? Now, Texas law is also extremely important in this case, because you cannot provoke someone in Texas and then claim self-defense. This is important, right? Like, you can't provoke someone into a confrontation, into a fight, and then claim self-defense in Texas. And we're going to break down the law for you in this episode, because it's extremely significant. And it's exactly what the judge will instruct the jury on, and how the jury will come to a conclusion. Juries take the facts, and then they take the set of facts that they determine collectively and apply it to the law that the judge gives them. And the Texas law is very specific about provocation. And this is a huge theme for prosecutors, because if you provoke the fight, if you provoke the confrontation, you are not entitled to claim self-defense in the state of Texas. Now, here's the problem for us. Not a problem for the jury, but the problem for us in trying to figure out whether or not this provocation took place, whether or not it was Karmelo Anthony provoking this confrontation underneath the tent, because there's no cameras in the courtroom, which to me I could do a whole nother episode just on this issue. When you have a case like this that divides the community, and there's going to be a verdict, and there's going to be a reaction to that verdict, right? And people didn't get to actually see the trial, it lessens the trust in the system. So the judge in this case, in keeping cameras out, has done a disservice to the public that the judge serves in Texas and around the world, because it's much more difficult to trust a verdict if you don't see the evidence. And like every other part of our government, the judicial branch is working for the people. And the people here are not going to get to see it. But the good news is, folks, that we have someone in the courtroom at the courthouse. His name is Cody Thomas. And joining us now from the courthouse, Cody Thomas. Cody, great to see you. Wow, what a case. So you are our eyes and ears inside the courtroom. Obviously, cameras have been prohibited, microphones prohibited. Give us an idea of where we're in the defense case, right? Where the defense is going.
Yeah, so this is day 2 of the defense's case, Vinny. We know we had a Saturday session a few days ago. I was in there. The defense got in 3 witnesses after the state rested. The state rested after only 21 witnesses being called. And today, so far, we're out of the lunch break now, but there were 3 witnesses called this morning. 1 student, an officer who was at the scene, and then another student. And the first student who was on the stand was, giving his account of what went down, saying that the rain was coming down. They went into a dugout. Him, Karmelo, and about 2 or 3 other people went into a baseball dugout behind the stadium, to which a coach told them they couldn't be there, so they came back out. This one student who was testifying, a minor, so I can't name him, but he testified about warming up on the field along with his 4x100 meter team, and then Karmelo going back in the bleachers. He didn't see Karmelo again for a few minutes until he looked up in the stands and saw what he described as, a crowd under the memorial tent with Karmelo there. He noticed his teammate. He says he recounts people standing up. He says that he was walking towards the bleachers because he heard a commotion. He looked away for a second, and then he saw, a bunch of kids sporadically, running from under the tent. And then he saw Karmelo running off. And of course, he's describing the moment that the stabbing happened. But under cross-examination, Vinny, when the prosecutor came up, the prosecutor brought the video back up, the surveillance video of the situation. And he brought up where the kid would be warming up on the field. So you see him, and then you see where the stabbing was going down. And the prosecution challenged it because the kid's account says that he was walking towards the bleachers because he heard some things happening. He paused it. He's like, boom. The prosecutor literally says, boom, in the middle of the courtroom. He's like, this is where the stabbing happened, and you're still standing right here. Okay, so then that happens, and the kid's, just going through the motions again. And then the prosecutor was like, we've spoken before. And the kid's like, yes, sir. He's like, when I showed you this video when we spoke, you admitted to me that you were wrong about some of your accounts. And the kid agreed that he was wrong, and his eyes were open after the meeting that he had with the prosecutors before this trial. So it was a very challenging moment there with that first witness, Vinny.
Let me ask you, Cody, a big picture question here. And obviously this is difficult for children testifying in a murder trial, right? That's tough. Yeah. We know eyewitness accounts. You have 7 people, you get 7 different versions. We get it. But here you have different high schools. Is the testimony breaking down in any way where, the kids from Memorial are seeing one thing and kids from Centennial are seeing something different? Centennial Karmelo School versus Austin School. Is that playing out inside the courtroom, that we're getting 2 different versions of what's happening here?
It actually is not, Vinny. And the way I've described it is that the story is like a tree. It's the same trunk, but different branches. The foundations of the story are the same, but there's some minor details that may have shifted. As, for example, some of the kids say that the push was 1 arm. Some say it was 2 arms. Some say it looked like maybe a slight punch. Some say the push wasn't aggressive. Some say both of the kids were getting aggressive. But the situation, there's commonalities between them all, and the main one being that Karmelo eventually put his hand in that book bag saying, touch me and see what happens. 100% of the students, not only the prosecution's witnesses, the defense's witnesses as well, the student witnesses, have said this same thing, which leads me, the defense, I would imagine they would have called student witnesses that were testifying in favor of Karmelo, but it seems that, the facts are the facts here, and they're walking down this story, and not the big pictures of the story haven't changed, only minor details in it. Again, like the pushing, whether it was 1 hand, 2 hands, or whatever, what have you, whether they were sitting or standing. But the big picture parts about the hand in the book bag, the touch me and see what happens, the phrasing, they all said they weren't really scared about something happening because they thought it was just 2 boys at a competition mouthing off at each other, being from different schools. They all said that not only did Austin ask him to leave, that multiple people under, the memorial tent asked him to leave, because the way they describe this tent culture, they've had coaches on the stand from all these different schools talking about how each tent is, like the locker room, and you wouldn't hang out in an opposing team's locker room. So Again, same trunk of the tree, just some slightly different branches coming off of it.
And the branches aren't breaking down by school to school. It's just witness to witness, like in any other case that we would have, where, you know, 5 people see a car accident and, you know, there's going to be slightly different versions, maybe different colors of the car. I've seen that happen inside a courtroom. Okay, so the tent seems to be a big issue here. We keep talking about what's happening under the tent. And that brings us to another big question. Why is he there to begin with? Does the defense have a different explanation, or what is the defense explanation as to why Karmelo Anthony would be under the tent of a different high school? Like you said, like being in another high school's locker room. You wouldn't do that in a gym. I never did track. I think you're a track guy. I think you have some track experience.
I did in high school, yeah.
Yeah, so explain what the defense and or their witnesses are saying about that as an explanation, because to me it doesn't make sense, but I'm trying to figure out why he would be there to begin with.
Right, so there's 2 narratives that the defense is putting on as far as why he was under the tent. One, they're talking about, you know, this big rain, and a lot of the students have talked about this rain coming down. They said, you know, it's Texas weather out here. It'll come down heavy, then it'll stop and get just a little nasty and yucky and be a little misty, and then it could come right back, similar to Florida. I know you're very familiar with Florida rain down there too. But they talked about, you know, he wouldn't want to be standing out there soaked. And oddly enough, Centennial was the only team out there with no tent that day. That's a big thing they're harping on. And so when this rain started coming down, they're saying Karmelo was in the bleachers just looking for somewhere to get out of the rain. And then compounding upon that, we heard about this kid named Eddie. Eddie is an adult now, so we can identify him. They talked about this kid named Eddie who was childhood friends with with Karmelo's ex-girlfriend at the time. And Eddie was under the Memorial tent. He went to Memorial High School, and over the weekend on Saturday, he actually testified. Now, we've heard this Eddie character in opening statements. We've heard that from several of the student witnesses that Karmelo came up, he kind of gave Eddie a handshake, you know, as if they were, you know, really close friends. But then Eddie got up on the stand on Saturday and all but said, like, yeah, we were cool. I knew him. He, you know, knew the girl or was dating the girl I grew up with, but I wouldn't say we were really good friends, which was shocking to me because we've heard that name so many times. And then for him to say that, but then the defense challenged back because Eddie was like, yeah, I know him, but we don't know each other that well. But then the defense came back with several pictures, picture after picture, 7 or 8 or 9 pictures of Karmelo and Eddie in the same photos at Eddie's house for, you know, birthday parties. And there was group photos and there was photos of just them. So I thought that was kind of a win for the defense, showing, all right, saying you didn't know him, but here you are with 8 or 9 pictures together. So the narrative is that he was trying to get out of the rain. He knew Eddie. Eddie says they didn't really know each other, but the defense came and proved a little otherwise under their cross-examination on Saturday.
And this is an important fact in all of this, in trying to sort through the facts of what happened under the tent. It all begins with, well, why was he there to begin with? So you've got rain. But it seems other teammates were warming up. He's not warming up. He's not competing in the track meet, is my understanding, right? He's there sort of helping, but he was hurt.
So his coach testified also on Saturday. That was the first defense's witness. We've heard the narrative that he wasn't competing. We've heard things about he was suspended from school. Nothing about the suspension has come up in this trial so far. But today, we found out through testimony that Karmelo was actually an alternate for the 4x100 meter race. And this kid that just testified said that he was actually on schedule to do one of the jumps, whether it was triple jump or long jump, he couldn't remember, but he actually was competing that day, which was, you know, another crucial fact because we've heard a lot of things about he wasn't supposed to be there. Well, yeah, he was on the team. He was supposed to be there. It's just unfortunate that this sad, you know, act had to happen here, but he was supposed to be there that day.
Okay, well, I mean, there's been a lot of rumors, information, misinformation, disinformation, and that's why we have trials, to get the facts out inside the courtroom. And Cody Thomas is bringing it to us because, again, no cameras, but we've got Cody Thomas. So let's talk about underneath the tent now. So he's there either to dodge the rain, to see his friend Eddie, or perhaps to start some trouble, right? Because there's that narrative from the other side. So what have we heard? You said we've heard these different branches. What is the tone of what is happening under that tent? And what is the the moment when things escalate, right? When does it go from nothing to something? And are there different versions of that?
Well, the common denominator, just to make it as simple as possible for people to understand, from 100% of these witnesses, defense witnesses and prosecution student witnesses, down the board, they say he came under the tent, wasn't malicious. They say he came under kind of calm, didn't really say much. Some say that he saw Eddie, gave him a handshake, didn't say much, but he was sitting there under the tent. So now they're asking, does anyone know this kid? Who is this kid? You know, this and that. He's just here. They start asking him who he is. Eventually, you know, some sort of verbal altercation start happening where they start asking him to leave. And it's not just Austin. It's not just Austin and his brother Hunter. There's kids that have been up there, mixed of all races, because we know the racial aspect is a big component here. But we have black kids testifying, white kids, Hispanic kids. So kids mixed of all, over 10 of them are testifying about how they even chimed in, like, hey man, come on, get out of here. You know, you shouldn't be under this tent. Just go back to wherever your tent is. And they said it all started kind of calmly, and then they said Karmelo was being stubborn and didn't want to leave. Like, you're gonna have to make me leave. You know, they described it as him trying to be like a tough guy. You know, and then eventually they have, some coaches say that Austin was a thrower. He was one of the discus shot put throwers. They've all kind of echoed the sentiment that the throwers were kind of the leaders, and they were, he was a senior, so, the upperclassmen are picked to kind of take charge when the coach isn't directly around. So eventually Austin kind of takes this lead to try to be like, all right, man, like it's enough of this. It's time for you to go. Things start getting heated. They do admit that Austin was getting, heated as well, getting frustrated, and they were going back and forth as, two testosterone-fueled young teenagers. We know how that goes with boys in competitive sports. And then, eventually they talk about the frustrations escalating on both sides. And then Austin saying, like, I'm not going to fight you at a track meet. They're getting aggressive with each other. And then eventually, the statement that we've heard many a time, Karmelo has his hand in the bag, touch me and see what happens. Austin goes up to touch him, to push him. Again, different accounts of that, whether it was a touch, whether it was a push, and that's when the whole unfortunate circumstance occurred here.
So it's as simple as, you're under this tent, you shouldn't be here, leave, I'm not going to leave, make me leave, and then it escalates to touch me and see what happens. So the verbal confrontation being described by the witnesses seems to be initiated by Karmelo Anthony. Is there anyone that said, well, no, they were getting loud and telling him to get out before the refusal?
No, there's been no testimony as far as that. Down the board, all the prosecution's witnesses, all of those students have been saying they're calling Karmelo the instigator. They're calling him the aggressor. They do admit that Austin was, fueled up too, and being too prideful, boys as they get. They even talked about how when, the statement with Karmelo with his hand in the book bag, they said Austin said back to him, like, oh, you're not going to do anything, calling his bluff. He's like, oh, you're from Frisco. We don't do that around here. And they're all sitting there not thinking that there would be an actual knife in the bag. So, all of them have said that Austin was kind of being a tough guy too. And then he went over to him, goes to push him, goes to shove him. But again, verbal altercation that led to this unfortunate event, something that, it shouldn't have been a stabbing here. We got two young kids who had their whole lives ahead of them, two 17-year-old men, and just this heightened mistake here that happens to be the most pinnacle of mistakes that has affected both of their lives just emotionally, and obviously it's changed their lives forever.
Absolutely. Absolute tragedy, what happened under that tent. But it's up to this jury to figure out exactly what it was. So let's talk about the prosecution case and the law here. Let's start first with what the prosecutor said in his open. I think this is extremely significant. The prosecutor says, you simply cannot provoke someone, and when they touch you, you take their life. This case is about plain murder, simple and senseless. Find this man guilty of first-degree murder. And the important part of what the prosecutor said there is, you simply cannot provoke someone. And what he's talking about is Texas law. Texas has a very specific law when it comes to self-defense and provocation. Let me put it up on the screen for you. The statute, Texas Penal Code, Section 9.31 B4. The use of force against another is not justified if the actor provoked the other's use or attempted use of unlawful force. Okay? You provoke what happened, you don't get to claim self-defense. That's the purpose of this. Now, the language in the statute is very plain. So there's been cases and litigation and decisions made by courts in Texas. And basically they've broken down to 3 parts of this provocation. Now, it's up to prosecutors. They have the burden of proof. You want to disprove self-defense, which is what they need to do here. You need to disprove self-defense. They can do that by proving provocation by Karmelo Anthony. Here's what they would need to show: that the act or words of Karmelo Anthony provoked the attack. The act or words were for the purpose of a pretext for doing harm. That the act or words can be reasonably calculated to provoke the attack. So what are we talking about here? That what Karmelo Anthony is saying and doing under that tent is to provoke Austin Metcalf to attack him, okay? That's what prosecutors need to prove. That the purpose of Karmelo Anthony provoking him to attack him is so that he can then attack and do harm on Austin Metcalf, which would be the knife, the stabbing. And that all of this, his words and his acts, were used to reasonably provoke this. So you need evidence that this is the reason he was doing it. And it can't be words alone. You have to do something else. And what prosecutors are saying here is the something else is the going under the tent, the bringing of the knife. All of that goes beyond just words in this case. Let's bring back in Cody Thomas, who's still with us. Cody, this testimony, how is it coming out? Are the words coming from the students themselves, the witnesses? Are prosecutors feeding them these magical words about provocation, etc.? What's going on inside that courtroom?
So the way it's been going, Benny, you know, as each witness gets up there, these are young kids. Some of them are still in high school. The prosecutor warms them up with, you know, normal questions. You play football, you're still in school, you're going to graduate, you know, all of that. Then they get into, of course, the horrendous events of that day. And they're walking through, they give their accounts. And then eventually the prosecutor has been ending pretty much all of his questioning, whether that be under direct or with some of these students, as he's under the defense's students, witnesses, under his cross-examination. He'll just ask them, who was the instigator here? Who would you say was the aggressor? Karmelo. Who was in the wrong? Karmelo. You know, things of that nature. You would say that Karmelo's the one. So I guess to your point, Benny, they are saying that word. Are you familiar with provocation? Yes, sir. Would you say Karmelo was provoking Austin Metcalf? So yes, it's kind of being fed in that way, but the defense is not putting up any objections here because, I mean, it's just a clear-cut question. Do you understand provocation? Yes, sir. Who would you say was the provoker here? Karmelo. And that's just how he's ended it, with 5 to 7 questions each time one of these students wraps up their testimony.
So give us an idea, because one of the things that the defense talked about was the fact that, okay, all these kids are from the same high school, you know, they're friends and teammates of the victim in the case. Is there anything coming out that would indicate or potentially make a juror think that these kids are colluding together, that they're shading their testimony to help their teammate and their friend who was stabbed to death that day? Is any of that making its way into the cross-examination of these important witnesses?
Not that has been spoken upon thus far in this trial, Benny. I mean, these witnesses get up there and testify. Of course, some were teammates. Some just knew the Metcalf boys. Some were, you know, their older brothers might have known them, things of that nature. There's been a couple of them. There was one kid who testified on Saturday who was a soccer player, saying he didn't know either party. He did not know Karmelo. He didn't know Austin. He was just there about to run the 800 race because, you know, soccer players have, you know, height and endurance, so they're running those distance races. He even talked about him just being kind of under the tent to himself. This was the first meet that he went to because soccer season and track season kind of overlap. So he was there just chilling out. Didn't know anybody and turned around and this was going on. So we've had 2 or 3 witnesses like that. We've had a couple of witnesses from an opposing school who, you know, were 20 feet away that might have known some people under the memorial tent, but nothing that seems as if from the memorial students that have testified so far as if, we're all ganging up, because not everybody was on the team with these boys. There was one that was a freshman who said that he knew them because his older brother played football with them on the team, so he just kind of knew them that way, just kind of in passing. Like, I was aware of who they were, but I happened to be at this track meet that they were at, but it's not like we had this strong personal connection. So from what I've heard so far, no, the defense hasn't brought it up in any cross-examination. The defense hasn't brought it up in any capacity that there's any collusion happening or any, conspiring to be in favor of the victim here. It's all, to me, just coming out fact by fact, account by account.
And I'll tell you, folks, that is not good news for this defendant. I mean, this is very consistent. The provocation is what this case is about for prosecutors. You prove that Karmelo Anthony is the one who provoked all of this, and then self-defense just goes away. So this is a tough case for the defense. Make no mistake. I get it. Prosecutors have the burden of proof. They have to disprove self-defense, right? You're proving a negative. That's always a challenge. But the way the testimony is being described and the testimony that's coming in, this is a strong prosecution case that is being built. So what is the defense going to focus on here? I think where the defense really has to focus is in the beginning. Like, why is he under the tent to begin with, right? Because if you talk about why he's under the tent, if he's not under the tent to pick a fight, if he's under the tent for another reason, maybe a juror thinks, well, okay, well, he wasn't there to provoke anything. Things happened, I get it, but he didn't go to the tent to provoke a fight so he could hurt someone. And that's kind of what prosecutors are alleging here, right? Because he brought the knife with him. Why do you bring a knife to a track meet? I want to bring back Cody. Cody, for the defense, we see it in every trial. You're dealt a hand and you got to deal with it. But it seems that the strongest facts that they may have in this case is the reason Karmelo is under the tent. From your perspective, having heard all this testimony and the way they've testified, is it clear in the courtroom why Karmelo's under the tent? Is it as in sort of an invited guest, seeking shelter from the rain, not there to provoke a fight, at least initially, in going underneath the tent?
So that is essentially the clear narrative in it. We've only heard that thing about being invited under the tent from that one witness. That was not consistent with anybody else, but who's to say? Again, there's different accounts of everything. Some people could have heard something. There's a lot going on at a track meet, but it seems that the clear, consistent thing that the defense is trying to drive the narrative home to the jury, is that this rain was coming down and he was trying to get out from under the rain. So that's the strongest fact that, as far as why he's under that tent. But Benny, what they've yet to do so far, and I'm sure, I would imagine at some point, either today or tomorrow, however long this case goes on, they have to explain, I feel, why he had a knife at a track meet. They've yet to bring that up. I mean, they could even just come out and say, maybe he loves to camp. They just haven't addressed the knife at all. We've seen the picture of the knife, a 3.5-inch blade folding knife, had the thumb stopper on it so you can swing it out really quickly with one hand if you wanted to. Of course, they've established that it's not against the law to have a knife under 5.5 inches at a stadium, but it is against school policy. So I feel like they're going to have to address that to make that a strong, narrative that they're going to have to drive home to this jury. They have to explain why this child had a knife at this track meet, because all these students that have testified beforehand, the prosecutors asking them, do you expect a knife to be at a track meet? No, sir. Have you ever seen a knife at a track meet? No, sir. Are you surprised that something like this went down at a track meet? Yes, sir. Was you scary? Was it scary afterwards when this was going down, when you were running away? Yes, sir. So no one was expecting, and they talked about Austin Metcalf, being boisterous as well, and then calling Karmelo's bluff with the whole touch me and see what happens situation. And they're all saying, Austin, along with everyone else that has testified so far, that they didn't expect that to happen. They thought maybe a fight was going to happen, a shove, be shoved back, and boys fight. But they were not expecting this knife to be there, which is a fact that I feel like the defense is going to have to really nail down as their case moves forward.
Yeah, it almost seems like that can only come from one person, from Karmelo Anthony himself. And there can't be an explanation that the knife just happened to be there, because he knows it's there. That's why his hand is in the bag. Just give me a little more detail here about the knife, because if he reaches out of the bag with the knife and it's a folding knife, then it's got to be unfolded at some point. So is it clear how and when that happened? Like, when does the knife go from like a folded pocket knife to a deadly weapon?
So that hasn't been specified definitively, but what I can tell you is that all of these witnesses have testified that things happened so fast. Some of them have said like the touch just was like boom, and then the knife came out. They turned and looked away, and then all of a sudden Austin's falling back, and they still say they didn't realize what had happened until Austin pulls his shirt up and they said they saw a hole in his chest. They didn't just describe it as like, a cut or a stab wound. They all described it as a hole, and when the medical examiner even testified on Saturday, Vinny, she described the wound as gaping, kind of like, for lack of a better term, kind of like filleted open. It was a 2-inch wound in his chest versus what she called a slit pattern, and we know that she testified and said the knife, hit his sternum cartilage and literally pierced the ventricle of the kid's heart. But they did not specify, if the knife was already unfolded, whether he had to unfold it. That's they talked about when they did a demonstration with the knife, how fast you could do it with one hand with that thumb stopper. But every single last witness has talked about how quickly everything went down. So whether that knife was unfolded, whether he just used this knife a lot and was able to unfold it quickly, that has yet to be determined. But everything went fast, according to all these witnesses that have testified so far.
Yeah, such an important point Cody is making here. This becomes incredibly important. Once the hand is in the bag, time for premeditation and time for provocation. So another huge part of what is happening is what's happening outside the courthouse and in the community as well. This is a very divisive case. It's divided the community in part along racial lines. It's had an impact because of who the victim is and who the defendant is, et cetera. So I want to bring back in Cody. Cody, first of all, how is the atmosphere inside the courtroom, first of all? Is there a level of tension? Would it be obvious to the jury? Is there a typical, lineup that we see sometimes in a courtroom where it's obvious one side of the courthouse is for the courtroom is for the defendant, one side is supporting the victim, and there's some tension in there? Is any of that palpable? Does that exist in this case?
Yeah, Vinny, you can definitely feel it upon walking in the courtroom. Everyone's keeping it professional and everything like that, but you could cut the tension with a knife. But I'd say tension versus emotion. I would say it's definitely emotional, especially, obviously, on behalf of the Metcalf family. I'm sitting 2 rows behind the father, Jeff Metcalf, and he, every 2 or 3 minutes just kind of hangs his head in his lap, and I can see him like nodding and shaking his head no as he's hearing some of these, gruesome details about what happened. I mean, he's hearing about his son being stabbed to death. And then obviously on the other side of the courtroom, I'm kind of far. I don't have, really good eyes on Anthony or his family, but, as I can take glances, they're just very serious. They're taking in all these facts they're hearing, because you got to remember, Karmelo is also a brother. He's a son. He's a nephew. He's a family member to these. He has loved ones in there as well. And, hearing these, gruesome allegations, I'm sure that's a whole toll for that family to take in too. Trying to wrap their mind around that this could, innocent until proven guilty, but this could be something that he really did. I'm sure that's just, that's a whole version of mental gymnastics that family has to play. But they're very serious on the Anthony side and very, verbally, audibly emotional on the Metcalf side. Not to the point where the judge has to, admonish anybody, but you could definitely hear some sniffles and stuff when things like that go down.
Absolutely. And, it's a self-defense case. So in a self-defense case, by definition, if you are a defendant, you are claiming that you are a victim. So you had to act to preserve yourself, to prevent great bodily harm or potentially death. That's the allegation by the defense. So as we look at what's happening in the courtroom, sometimes that makes the dynamics even more tense. All right, take us outside of the courtroom now. Take us outside the courthouse and into the community. I know they put up a lot of security. We've talked about that before. How are things playing out there in Texas?
Yeah, that outside is where the tension actually lives here, Vinny. I mean, we've had different advocate groups for both sides, for each party. I mean, right as we speak, I see some members of the Black Panther Party off to my right. We've had members of, the opposite side as well that have been out here all week. And, people that come out here just trying to, obviously there's some supporters of each side, but then you have the influencers off of social media coming in just trying to stir the pot a little bit. I don't know if it's for the clicks or whatever, but this is where, a lot of the confrontation is happening out here. I mean, even in the last few minutes when I've been standing out here, there have been people walking by, giving me their unsolicited opinions about this case and everything like that, what have you. But security's here, and it's not just the sheriff's deputies walking around with their sidearms on them. They have the long guns as well. They have the sheriff car just pulled behind me, just patrolling the parking lot. So security's high, making sure everything stays safe. Of course, people are entitled to their opinions. That's their right to have an opinion. But there's been a couple of clashes here over the past few days, but no one's gotten hurt, thankfully so. But the tension is definitely high outside this courtroom.
Yeah, and this is just during the testimony. There's going to be a moment in this case, like in every case we covered, Cody, where there's going to be a verdict. What are your thoughts about that moment? Do you think it's going to be one of those moments where, hey, there could be a reaction, one side or the other, or both reacting to what this jury ends up saying?
Absolutely. I've been thinking about that for the past few days. I feel as if no matter what this verdict comes down to be, whether it's not guilty, there's going to be a reaction from either side in either direction. Somebody's going to have a feeling one way, somebody's going to have a feeling another way. I hope that everyone can stay civil and that it doesn't lead to anything, any further mistakes, any further violence outside this courtroom. But there will for sure be a reaction. I can almost guarantee that no matter how it goes, somebody's going to feel some type of way about the outcome of this once that day comes.
Yeah, just another reason why you need cameras and microphones in a courtroom in a case like this, so the entire community gets the transparency and maybe can understand the jury's verdict when it does come down. Cody Thomas in Texas for us. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for having me, Benny. Happy to be here.
I cannot stress how disappointed I am in the judge's decision to keep cameras out here. Because there's going to be a verdict, there's going to be a reaction, but do you understand the verdict? Will you be able to accept the verdict if you haven't actually seen firsthand and heard firsthand the evidence in the case, the testimony in the case? I want to go back in time. At Court TV, this is what we do. We cover high-profile cases, cases that divide communities and divide the nation. When we were covering the case involving the murder of George Floyd, we were in a state that prohibited cameras since the beginning of time. We never got a camera inside a courtroom in Minnesota. But Judge Cahill was smart. He understood the implications and knew that the people of his state and the people around the country needed to see and hear the evidence so they could better understand and perhaps trust the verdict. And in that case, it was clear that the expert testimony put forth by prosecutors was far superior to what the defense put up. And it made a huge difference. And I think a lot of people who maybe were on the fence on it, maybe understood it. And I think it was much more accepted. Should have happened here. I'm Vinny Politan. We're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, please don't forget to hug the kids.